it makes me feel good that I think your guys' dynamic is very similar to mine and my dad's and yours and your dad's as well.
Yeah.
So you guys feel good you have normal dads now, right?
Yeah,
That's right.
We reaffirmed it at this point.
Yeah. At least I'm not the only one who's been frustrated in the past.
And we're back.
Hey.
HUNTR Podcast. Oh, geez.
Back in studio.
I have no... 56? Okay. Episode 56.
When do we stop counting?
Well, we have a bunch of ATA ones rolling out, so that's what kind of threw me off. Because ATA just happened. We recorded a bunch.
No, I'm saying at some point we should just stop counting.
Oh. Joe still counts.
Who?
Rogan.
Oh.
We're on a first-name basis.
Joe.
We're on a first-name basis.
Okay.
We got to keep track.
Yeah,
well,
we
don't have to actually say the episode number, but for purposes of keeping track, we'll keep track.
It's good to be back.
Good to be back in studio. The last time you saw us in studio, we made the threat that it may be the last HUNTR podcast, but we are reassembled.
With extreme ease. Yeah, Colton did a great job setting up, tearing down, and we're back. We rolled in this morning. All of our stuff was still in the back of the truck, so
yes,
unloaded everything this morning, set everything back up. And,
I pulled my ass out of quarantine yesterday after a negative test.
Yeah,
the three of us are remaining positive because we're negative.
Yeah,
feeling
good.
And can't say the same for a lot of people from the ATA show.
Yeah, hope everybody's doing all right out there.
Lots of positive tests flying around.
Not
but
listen to this podcast from the couch.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Yeah, but it'll. I mean, we were just kind of touching base with the guests today on it. ATA was good for us. We had some good podcasts, and you guys are going to see these things rolling out. But kind of sad in the same way to see, that industry show is definitely on its last leg. Whether it comes back in 23, they'll have to make some serious adjustments if so. But it is January 13th today. I got a cool buck on camera in Kentucky over the last 36 hours.
We're about to pull off what's never been done is two close friends killing two he-she bucks in their lifetime. I mean, that's a buck of a lifetime for sure, just in terms of rarity. Yeah, so if you're listening to this, you may have to dive back a little bit on our Instagram or Facebook, but I made a post on there of this. It looks like a mainframe 8 would probably what it is. Deer looks ancient. With some trash and stuff. I mean, he's got like a downturned beam and... Yeah,
a couple kicker drops and like 9-inch bases. And so essentially what it is like this buck just is continuing. We talked about it with your buck, with Fuzzy Wuzzy.
That deer's going to have like over 50 some inches of mass. He's going to have like pushing 60 inches of mass.
Yeah, because he clearly is just growing every year over top of the existing rack.
Yep.
It just looks good. And this is what's cool about that property is I border all this, national forest, Indian Boone National Forest down there in eastern Kentucky. And it's huge ground, hundreds of thousands of acres of timber. And I assume that deer just eventually was like, I'm hungry, and found our property, and ventured into it. So, I've got what we talk about till Monday. I'm supposed to be at SHOT Show next week, but we've got, number one, we're dodging COVID. Number two, like an impending snowstorm here Sunday into Monday in most of the East Coast. In fact, my wife Emily was just texting me. Her friend in South Carolina is supposed to get like 8 to 12 inches Saturday to Sunday. So, I mean, it sounds like it's going to engulf the whole East Coast. So if that's the case as of tomorrow, I think I'm going to pull Audible, try to get to the cabin Saturday. And that gives me like 2 days to kill that deer before the season ends on Monday. Maybe.
There's hope.
Be a hell of a way to shut her down. He daylighted last night. I sent you the picture. Mm-hmm. So he's there. He's hanging tight. So maybe it's a possibility. So we'll see. But it's cool, just to know that there's a deer like that in the area. Like I said, he probably has 50 inches of mass. The rest of them is probably a 115-inch mainframe.
He's got like a 100-inch frame. It's not a giant frame deer by any means, but he's got some
just
really cool
character and ancient.
You got to remember take some Valvaloc with you.
Yeah,
when you go,
for sure. Yeah, but just ancient. Like I'm sure if we killed him and pulled a jawbone, like nothing left of that deer.
Yeah.
So
that reminds me, I have that jawbone at my house. I was supposed to bring it today.
We need to pull that for the deer age stuff.
Uh-huh.
We'll get it. So anyways, that's kind of where we're at. Season is winding down. In fact, so we've got guests today, and the season is closing Saturday for them in Missouri. So we've got Shawn and Rex Luchtel from Heartland Bowhunter on. Shawn's been on the podcast before.
Yep, and Rex is his dad, the one that you're always seeing killing giant bucks.
Yeah.
That's why I asked him beforehand. I said, how does it feel to be the favorite Heartland Bowhunter?
Well, and Rex, I think, killed a really good one. Was it right before Christmas you and I were talking?
This year, yeah.
Yeah, because I think it was the day we were on podcast, and I just found those sheds in PA, and I was like, yeah, Shawn's dad just like killed a really good one in Missouri.
Yeah, well, and we've been meaning to catch up with Shawn. The last time we talked to him was right before our mule deer hunt, and because he was getting ready to head out to, I think, Nebraska or maybe Montana. Yeah, so we were just, we were need to get caught up on that anyways, and so we figured we'd ask if Papa Luchtel wants to come on too and talk,
Big Papa,
talk about his big buck killing spree.
And so it sounds like Rex just got to their camp in the northern part of Missouri. Yep. And so a good time of year to kind of catch a wrap up with these guys, and because of how you and I both have really close hunting relationships with our dads. To kind of bring that all into the mix and see how theirs is like or unlike ours.
Yeah.
100%. So I think it'll be pretty cool. So without further ado,
Shawn and Rex.
Hey,
you're on.
We still haven't figured out a good way to do that.
Yeah, to like tap you in and be like, hey, we're coming back to you at this point.
So, welcome to the podcast, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, Shawn's the veteran here, Rex. He's been through this ringer before. We've hopefully caught him in better times than the last time, as his bow was essentially falling apart on him, and the season was pretty imminent at that point.
Yeah.
But Shawn, you recovered nicely. You were able to pull your composure together and execute.
I think it was the release. I was thinking about that.
I think it was both. I think your trigger fell off your release, and you were having an issue with your rest was loose as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. I remember that day. I got a phone call too.
Yeah. We kind of caught him in that moment, and I think it was because you were leaving for Montana, maybe in like 4 days.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it worked out though. So I'm glad it all came together.
It's amazing how many things can go wrong, for as many times as you shoot your bow during the off season, and that we spend fine tuning it and stuff. It seems like the day of, or for me, when we got out because you were heading to Montana and we were heading to the Dakotas. We were going to hunt South Dakota for the very first time. And so on these Hoyts, we're shooting these carbon RX5s, and on the bottom, they've got a Hoyt mix that's called the SL sidebar mount. And it's for that rear stabilizer to mount directly to the riser. And we obviously didn't have any like input on that design or anything like that. But we got all the way out to South Dakota, and as I was screwing in that SL sidebar mount, I stripped it out. And so because there's only 2 or 3 threads on that thing that catches it.
And it's a metal on metal type of thing too.
Yeah, it was my first time traveling with that thing, and so I stripped it right out of there. And fortunately, I think Jeremy had an extra one that I ended up using. But
and we had an interesting thing there. Was it the way that we attached that sidebar mount that you found that your shooting was a little bit off?
Yeah. So there's a spot on that riser that you're supposed to mount that sidebar mount, and it works good, but there's only a handful of threads that will catch, which seems like an issue. And so I to gain more of those threads, because I had plenty of that screw left over that weren't stripped, I moved it up to a different spot on the riser that seemed like even better. I was like, man, this seems like maybe even a better spot to mount this to. And that caused my bow to shoot like at 30 yards. I was like 6 inches low and left. And it would just seemed like it was one of those mental things that it's like, there's no way that this point of contact on the riser is causing that. But I was like, shot with it on, shot with it off, shot with it on, shot with it off. Clearly was causing something major to happen, and not in a good way.
And I mean, we're in the Dakotas, like tomorrow's opening day.
We're on the hunt. We're on the hunt, which seems like it always goes that way.
Yeah. So, and I know, Shawn, I think you kind of touched in some of your videos when you were out there, and we've hit it on the podcast, but man, the drought out in that area had just made such a massive impact on how we were used to deer moving. out there, or where they even were going to be located?
Yeah, I had a tough time, real tough time finding deer. There was only, so I had a few different properties that I could hunt, and there was one property that they were on that was irrigated, and so they had a pivot, but there was cows on the pivot. They just moved cows onto that pivot, and it really screwed with the deer. And I was able to go on one stalk and almost got it done, and blew the deer out of there. And
that's the one we saw. That's the one we saw, Shawn, on social.
Yeah, and I could never find him again. And then I went and actually started door knocking, and because the river was right there, and I'm trying to remember which river it even was, but I think it may have been the Yellowstone. Actually, I can't. But anyhow, we knocked on some doors, talked to one guy, and like all the deer, the whitetails at least, and some mule deer were down there on the river where there was actually water and vegetation. And I just could never find another place to hunt, so ended up leaving. But yeah, it was wild. Like the places that have hunted out there before weren't really close to too much water, and there was just pretty much nothing.
Yep.
It was crazy.
What was it, just private access you were hunting to start?
Yeah, and I checked out some public, actually quite a bit of public, and I could never just really find anything that was worth going after. So
yeah, man,
we had all kind of fun getting it. I mean, the travel aspect of a trip like that, especially for us, it's like 25 hours.
Yeah.
You know, makes it, I guess you could say adds to the fun. Like,
yeah.
For us, we drove all the way out there, and then I think it was like close to the Black Hills. We rented a camper. Jack's Camper Rentals, a giant facility they got down there, and because that's right where they have Sturgis and stuff, and so they're used to out of towners. And so we picked up a camper there and drove. By the time we got to our North Dakota spot, so I did most of my door knocking beforehand. I'd made a bunch of calls. I spent way too many work hours making phone calls to just random North Dakota numbers. And trying to get permission, trying to find a place to stay. And we made some great contacts because that ended up saving our trip. We got a flat tire. I'll tell you about that here a little bit later, but nice to have contacts in the area. And so when we got this camper to our campsite, which was just a guy's like homestead, he's like, yeah, I've got hookups and all this kind of stuff. He did, but they were pretty rickety to begin with, and we didn't have like the right hookups.
Yeah,
and stuff.
The converters and stuff.
So we actually ended up in Montana too. We drove over to Baker to like an Ace Hardware to pick up like a converter, and had an interesting encounter with a guy that was running that place. He's like, what do you mean like a male versus female end? And I was like, well, the male end has like prongs like this, and the female has like a receiving. And when we met the guy in person, it made like total sense. The guy's like, have you guys like ever been to Montana? And we're like, yeah, we're here right now. He's like, oh, right. Yeah, of course.
Of course. Yeah, just some stoner kid who didn't have a real bright future ahead of him.
Poor guy.
Yeah, because we drive out there and he's sitting there with the wrong converter, and it's like, dude, we were super clear about what we needed. We drove out here because you told us you had it, and then fortunately they did, like buried in the back room, and I was like, jeez.
Yeah, it was an adventure.
Always adventures on those trips.
We didn't kill anything either, Shawn, if it makes you feel any better.
Did you guys see anything that you were trying to kill?
Yeah, we hunted our butt off for sure.
Well, in South Dakota, I think on the second day, within probably 10 minutes of each other, Jeremy and I both had opportunities. In fact, it was a weird deal. We went to South Dakota with some like tentative permission. A lot of those people were like, well, yeah, you know what? Just while you're out here, just stop in and we'll see how it goes. I'm like, okay, cool.
And we leased the piece of ground too. So that's where we set up base camp essentially.
We had a lease. So we started the lease. It took us about a day to figure out that lease was shit. There's nothing on it. And so we started going to some of this private, and the one that we had these encounters with, it was kind of like they had like a farm office type situation, and knocked on the door, and this lady comes out like waving her arm. She's like, don't come in, COVID. And we're like, oh, okay, yeah. And so I just, from a distance, explained who we were, what we're trying to do. And she's like, oh, you're fine. You'll be fine. She said, just go hunt. I was like, are you sure? Like, the guy that I talked to, I was pretty sure he wanted like $500 a head type of deal, or I don't know. I just wanted to make sure we were in the clear to go and do it. She's like, absolutely, you're 100% fine. Go do this. So we went out, and we'd already driven past the place, saw deer. You know, it seemed like a good enough place to
saw a lot of whitetails
to spend some time on, a lot of whitetails. And so we spent, I don't know, 4 hours hunting this whole drainage out before we got to this, you know, what seemed like a destination food source. And we're like, well, cool, we'll set up here. And as the night progressed, long story short, I ended up missing a whitetail at like 70 yards, and Jeremy ended up missing up, I don't know, what 150-ish type mule deer at a similar distance, probably. And both of us like shot over the back. And then shortly thereafter, this guy comes ripping out, and we're probably a mile deep into this property. This guy comes out in like a flatbed truck or something, and you know, finds Jeremy and basically says, hey, I'm kind of like the farm manager here, and like whoever gave you permission, like she doesn't know what she's talking about. And
at that point, it was like, cool, bro. Like, we're done anyways. We're leaving.
Yeah, he's like, you didn't see this. I've got this real old whitetail. He's kind of like this 8-point with some kickers. And I was like, yeah, I saw him.
Yeah, came close.
I saw him. And
he also told me there were like no mule deer on the property, and I like closed the distance on clearly like a whole batch or group of mule deer. So yeah, it just real awkward. And the drought had just messed so much stuff up there. And we found that out when we went to North Dakota. It just, you know, where all the deer had been in previous years, there were none to be found. There was a lot of cattle, but that was it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sad. I don't know how that's going to, you know, I don't know how long that'll take for that to recover. Like, you think that most of them died?
So they did talk about, when we left, we were starting to hear more and more rumors of EHD, you know, just massive EHD outbreaks in some of those areas. I think the big thing for us, and this was a North Dakota thing, but you know, we had hunted and had success in a lot of the big badland areas in North Dakota. This year, all of the deer that we saw had been pushed up to the grasslands, and spot and stalk in those grasslands was damn near impossible. I mean, we saw a ton of bucks. We saw 20 plus bucks a day, but I mean, you couldn't, it was impossible to stalk them.
Really?
Just couldn't do it. Yeah.
Instead of being like under them shelves and stuff. So like in the badlands, typically our strategy is you can kind of still hunt all the drainages, like from a distance. You can get up to a high point, glass down in, or, you know, peek over an edge, and one out of every 50 or 100, like, you know, there will be one there and you can kill them. In the grasslands, like Jeremy said, we're seeing them everywhere. It's like, there's one on the distance here, you know, they'd come in behind us, but they would lay up on these, they're just hillsides covered in, is it just sage or
buckbrush? And
it wasn't buckbrush, because that's what they're feeding on.
Sage.
It was sage. And it was just impossible to get a shot at them, because we'd get in range and there's like a 6-foot wall of sage behind them in every direction. And we would go, once we bombed them, we'd go into the bed and be like, oh, like here's the spot. Like, no wonder there's no chance you could ever kill them out of these things. And it was about a week of that, just getting close.
A lot of mileage, a lot of bump and chase, and just
came home empty-handed.
Yeah.
Dang, that's tough, man. I've been there. I mean, that's pretty much exactly how my Montana one went. Like, you drive a lot, and you know, you're out there all day pretty much, and at the end of it, you're like, all right, this sucks. This isn't my boat.
Well, here's what capped ours off. Last thing I'll say about our trip. It was day, I don't know, four or 5, something like that. You know, we'd been hunting hard. We were kind of tired. There's like 2 roads that access, like from the town that we're staying in to where we're hunting at. It was probably a 20, 25 minute drive.
Easily. Yeah.
Okay. And we get to our spot. It's like, it's still dark. You know, it's first thing in the morning. We get out of the truck. This is Jeremy's truck. He's got a big F-250 with some serious rippers on there. Some good tires, Nittos, I think. Brand new, I think.
Yes.
Ish. We get out and I hear sure enough, I think it was our passenger side rear tire had a big, like, raptor tooth looking rock jammed all the way up in it. And I
had a bit of a breakdown at that point.
Jeremy had a little bit of a breakdown, and I'm like, so are we gonna hunt still, or? And
yeah, because I mean, one, you're like, you know, it's just a gravel road, and you're pulled off, so you're already not level, you know, and in that grass and stuff. Like, good luck jacking that truck up to like get the tire off of it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, and you're in the middle of nowhere. You know, what are you gonna do? So it took.
We got the spare on.
Yeah.
So fortunately, we had a spare. We got it on, but then we had a spare with we had a tire, but no spare. So we were kind of like risking it.
Yeah.
You don't want to do too much on that, but this is where the contacts come in handy. Is fortunately I had called some of the big land, some of these guys own 10, 20,000 acres. It seemed like, I was like, surely one of these guys has to have like a spare tire or has a connection. Fortunately, in Baker, Montana, they've got a 24-hour emergency farm tire service. And so we were able to take it in. The guy fixed us up good. And it went from in the morning thinking like, hey, we might be done. Like we might be needing to drive home at this point to we got a couple more days out of it.
And we still sucked, but
yeah.
Story.
It seems like somebody typically always gets a flat tire out there. I didn't, fortunately, this time, but I did almost rip my bumper off and high center my truck. And fortunately, I didn't get high center, because if I would have, we're not in cell service, and we were probably, I think, like 40 miles away from the nearest town in the middle of that.
I mean, that's it. It's not you're not in these like remote, like I'm packing up into the high country type hunts, but like just where you end up by trying to chase these deer, like you are remote. Yeah, your vehicle's right there and you can get in it and you can drive back to your base camp every night. But I mean, if something happens, you're out there a long ways.
Yeah, you're going to be walking a long ways if you don't have service.
Yeah.
It's crazy. How many days did you guys hunt?
7 or 8?
Yeah, 7 or 8 plus 2.5 of driving or so. So we were gone for almost 10 days. I think that's what it was. Yeah,
it was a blast. Yeah, don't get me wrong. We had an awesome trip, but it was
hard. Yeah, it's a hard way to kick the season off.
Oh yeah, yep. I did the same thing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I thought was really cool about having both you and your dad Rex on, Shawn, is that like Jared and I obviously have really good hunting relationships with our dads, and it's clear to say like we do share some of the same mindset, but we also don't share all of the same mindset. And so I was curious in terms of how like you and your dad, I see your dad laughing right now, so I know where this is going to end up going. But like, do you, like, obviously from the outside looking in, if we're watching, you and your dad, or we're watching Heartland Bowhunter, like, we're like, oh, okay, like it seems like, Rex and Shawn like share the same mindsets. But Rex, you're laughing, so I assume that maybe isn't the case all the time.
Well, it would probably be no different than anyone you shared property with or did anything with, you spent that much close time with. Eventually you're going to find something you disagree about, so to speak. But yeah, there's an age difference. There's a different, even I look back when we started the show, and when I first saw, first season 1 wasn't really the show, but season 2, when they got Trevor on board to produce it, who had no experience in the hunting industry, he didn't even know what a hunting show was, and he changed the whole look and focus. I was like, this doesn't look right. This isn't going to go anywhere. It's not appealing to me at all. And, it gained traction immediately, because I believe that's what younger people wanted to see. They were tired of being sold product, hard sold on TV shows. And, it's the same old. Guys are on, and they're talking about hunting and the products they're using and everything else. So, that's where I came from. So it was a change. There's no question about it. But through the years, as it's evolved, we're on the same page. There's no question about it. Do we still have differences of opinions on what we do, how we manage? Yes, for sure. There's no doubt about it. And I don't think that'll ever change, but overall, we make it work. And I would expect that anywhere where you have an age difference, to where, because I was raised completely different the way we hunted. Mm-hmm. So to where we're at today and where we're going, I enjoy it a lot. I think the filming aspect is what renewed my interest in hunting more than anything else. I mean, because it's nice to spend all that time alone out there hunting, and you see a lot of neat things, but after a while, it can wear you down a little bit too. So videoing it and sharing that, kind of a team deal, it reinvigorated me a lot. So, but I won't, it's a lot of work. I think that's what everybody really doesn't understand about when you're filming and doing everything. It's a lot of work to carry all that stuff out there, you know, time in, time out. And even for the hunter, it's increased pressure. I mean, because, you know, you feel like you got to produce behind the camera, and you got two guys out there, could be two different mindsets, and you got to make it work. So yeah.
Rex, have you been involved like from day one, or, you know, Shawn, did you and Mike kind of kick this thing off, and a couple of years into it, you guys started going on hunts together, or how did that work?
I'll let Shawn explain it. Let's see how he explains it.
Yeah. We were Mike and I hunted together. I mean, I grew up hunting, obviously, with my dad. He's the one that taught me how to hunt and got me into it and all that. But Mike and I started hunting together, and we're filming each other. So that's kind of like what sparked the whole video aspect of it. And then I guess as we kept going, that would be, I'd say like pretty much right after that, after Mike and I started, then we started hunting with my dad with a camera as well. And I'd say we all three of us were pretty much kind of going together at that point, especially since my dad was for the most part, the property owner of some of the stuff that we were hunting. And so we incorporated him with the videoing because he was so into bow hunting as well. And then from there, it's just kind of kept the same stride. And, you know, his interest in hunting and all that, and bow hunting, and the level of experience is up there with us as well. And so, yeah, we've just all kind of stayed hunting together and filming one another since the beginning, pretty much.
I have to wonder, like, because, you know, Rex, when you're talking about kind of the way that you grew up, and, you know, that's how, like, and I'm sure, Shawn, you're the same way. Like, I remember, you know, I don't know, probably in my teens or something like that, you know, watching like TNN on like a Sunday night, and it's like, you know, the standards, right? Realtree, Buckmasters, like that's, yeah, that was prior or early in the OSG days that, you know, Outdoor and Sportsman's Channel even existed. And, you know, to that point, like, I remember like some of those things, like you got excited for those things, but then you started to see this shift in terms of, you know, when Outdoors Channel and Sportsman's Channel kind of came along. You know, I guess, Shawn, on your side, when you and Mike started to think about that, you know, I filmed just because I don't know why I did it. I wanted to kind of like be able to relive some of those hunts, I guess, that I was doing, to your dad's point, like by myself. But I guess at what point did it kind of click that you were like, well, we should do something different?
Yeah. So, that's the exact same reason that we started filming. In fact, I think it was Mike that was the one that was really bringing a camera along. He strapped a handy cam to a stabilizer, I remember, when we were in high school. And he would get some videos of him shooting some does with that. And I think that's what really kind of sparked it, the video aspect. And then we started hunting together, saw him here and there, like turkey hunting, and we'd film each other. And then it just got, you know, gradually got a little more serious, but there was never, in the beginning, for sure, there was never any like motive to be like, oh, we're going to turn this into a show or whatever.
Right.
But like my dad said, I think what Trevor kind of incorporated into what we were already doing is what really sparked the interest to have like something like legitimate and knew that we had really like a niche in the market, and just something that was outside the box compared to what was already there. So that's what really pushed it along, I feel like.
And I think that's one that, you know, at least for us, first of all, kudos to you guys to kind of embrace that change, right? Because, you know, even still today, I mean, there's a lot of the traditional shows, and I think that, you know, not in a bad way towards them, but they're starting to suffer, right? Like the public, as well as even the sponsors in the industry, are starting to realize, like, you know, that doesn't sell as well as we think it was, or you know, it's not worth what we were paying. You hear all of these things in the industry a lot, but I think what's interesting about the way that you guys looked at it is, you know, and maybe that's where the Trevor piece came in, is it really started to involve more like a story or a journey, right? Versus turnkey hunts. Because, I mean, obviously, you know, you guys are thinking about it, just like most hunters are, where there's more to the the show or the story than what you see. You guys decided, well, let's embrace that as much, if not more, than the hunt itself, is the way I would look at it.
Yeah. So early in it, when I had those thoughts of this isn't appealing, so to speak, and as we gained more and more traction, I remember Shawn or Mike or both of them forwarding on emails from feedback. And we had a lot of people, and I'm not just talking one or two, would send in comments that they ran across the show, they don't even hunt, but they enjoyed the cinematography of it so much that they just started watching it. Mm-hmm. And then, people wanting to learn how to get into hunting. So I think a lot of that, I look at it and I tell people, I think we put as much emphasis on the video side of it as we do the hunting side. I mean, Shawn will tell you that. I think he enjoys that as much as hunting. He really does. I mean, being behind the camera as much. And so I think that is where a lot of people, and what's really changed it. The old hunting shows, they're still fun to watch and everything else. But I think, I look at it and go, today's generation, I say they're different, mm-hmm. Is it because there's more kids college educated and so on and so speak, and they can see right through, the old platform, so to speak. But I think everybody wanted to see the story side of it. And also that hunting's not just a, 2-week or 3-month part of the year. It's a year-round activity. And this is what we do. And this is and a lot of people do it. People mm-hmm. are getting more into not just the going out for 2 weeks rifle hunting. They want to get into that, shed hunting. Land management's become so big now, and what you can do with it. And I enjoy it as much as I do hunting, So I think that's where our show kind of everybody started seeing that, and they gained an interest in it. So.
Yep. Dude, I think for me, how long have you guys been doing it now? You remember when season 1, season 2?
Well, this is like our 15th season that we're starting.
Okay, that makes sense.
Not starting, but finishing.
That makes sense because I had to have been like, I don't know, 15 to 16 range, like when I kind of like just discovered it. And I remember it was like I'd never seen anything like it, because I grew up watching the Outdoor Channel and like all the shows that you said, Bone Collector, and mm-hmm. I think it was that Matthews like solo cam show that everybody was like the solo cam pro. That's who was self film. That's that's where that whole thing came from. But dude, the Heartland Bowhunter thing for me was like, because at the time and even to this day, like I just I like to fantasize about like being in the whitetail woods or like whichever aspect of of hunting that we're talking about. I felt like your guys' production kind of gave me the opportunity. It was like it gave a visualization to like what was happening in my head. Like I used to like even once I got into college, like I would listen to like the like chill step type radio stuff, like that music selection that like allowed me in my headspace to kind of go there. Like I thought your guys' production was the first and probably to this day one of the only shows that like encapsulated that fantasy aspect that like just gave me the freedom to kind of escape in my own mind to like what hunting is and it's mm-hmm. in its purest form.
In kind of same way but different. The reason I got turned on to what you guys were doing is I had just moved from Mississippi to Columbia, Missouri, and so I'm a born and bred Pennsylvania hunter, right? Who now is located in the Midwest, which seemed like the Mecca, but also like was pretty unfamiliar to the way that, what I was expecting. And so like I got turned on to these guys, but it was like, oh, this is where these guys hunt. This is their wheelhouse. So I almost looked at it as a way to kind of condition myself to the changes that I was going to be. Cause like now I'm living in a state where, and again, I never did it, but and Shawn, I think we talked about it. Like I could kill $3 in a year, and it was like, is this possible? Like, could I actually do this? And, there's certain parts of Missouri that is like premier, farm country and fragmented woods. There's other parts that's, big timber and, then you can even go towards the river and, it's kind of a mix and you got swamps and sloughs and stuff. So, I'm looking at it as like a complete different way of like, what's the fastest way for me to condition myself to hunting a state like Missouri And so as I started like searching for content, like I find these guys and I'm like, oh, like this is their backyard. This is how I'm going to adapt to it. But I think to your point too, Jared, it was different in that, you know, you guys weren't out there just saying, oh, cool, we're at so-and-so outfitter. We went out and we hunted and we did this. Like I start to see, you know, the impact in the year-round activities that you're looking at, from shed hunting to food plotting, you know, on the farms and stuff. And that was, you know, like, yeah, Bill and Midwest Whitetail and these guys are doing it, but it still was different in that you guys took that look, feel, cinematography, story aspect and still were able to make a show. Because most people would tell you, well, yeah, but that's hard for a television show because people just want to see you kill deer. And I think you guys defied that. You said, no, they want to see a good hunt, but ultimately they want to feel part of it more than, oh, like I can't relate to that. Like, or he just showed up and, you know, shot this deer and kind of went home type of thing.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. You did.
So it was just weird. It was weird in a good way because it was so unique at that time in the industry, which was a lot of, you know, show up, kill it, close it. Like I didn't feel pulled through the season on most shows. On your show, I almost felt like, well, what's next week's episode? Like what's next? You know, it pulled me through that journey a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that's really the only reason that we've been successful in what we do, is just because like there was such a strong connection with people in the outdoors on our show, and even people that weren't necessarily hunters. Like I remember, and we still get them today, but like in the beginning, like we would often get emails from people saying, you know, like your show's the only show I can sit down and my wife will actually sit in the same room and watch the show with me. He's like, usually she leaves and goes and does something else because she can't stand hunting shows, but like the music aspect and everything and the connection with the outdoors is why she sits there and watches it, and now she wants to go hunting or whatever, you know. So yeah, I think the music, the shots, all of it are far more than just going out and shooting a deer, which is really I feel like the biggest testament to our success, especially from the beginning.
So Rex, I have to ask, just because I kind of envision my own dad, what his answer would be. But what were Shawn and Mike like in the high school days of hunting, and you know, how much gray hair did he give you back then, I guess?
Well, you know, that little Sony Handycam he talked about Mike had, well, I had one too, and Shawn used it. And guess who has all those tapes? I do. I have that vault of tapes at my house, and I need to get them out and make them digital, actually, because I think there's going to be some good stuff somewhere down the road. I don't know when their kids grow up or whatever, but it'd be fun to produce an episode of those two of that stuff. But no, they were your normal kids. Well, one thing you guys don't know, my dad was a federal game warden.
Oh, wow.
So he was in conservation all his life, started in Iowa and then became a federal agent. So I grew up being the game warden's son, and everybody thinks, oh, wow, I bet that was cool. Well, I think I hunted with my dad one time ever in his entire career. And I fished with him probably more than I ever hunted, because my dad was always gone.
Right.
He was always working on the weekends, and, you know, federal agent. Hey, he used to leave for the summer and go band ducks and geese up in Canada. So he wasn't around a lot. He didn't really, and I'm not complaining, he didn't teach me hunting. I pretty much taught myself and through our friends. So growing up that way, I'll tell you a funny story if you want to hear it about being a game warden's son when I was younger here in a minute. But growing up that way, I was always big on, you know, obeying the law, so on and so to speak. So Mike and Shawn, for the most part, live by the rules. You know, we all have had infractions in our life, so to speak. So, but they were a go, go, go group. I mean, Shawn's twin, I like to say, you know, and it's kind of interesting growing. Everybody asks, well, what's the secret to get your kids to grow up to hunt? I go, well, the biggest thing is show them a great experience the first few times they go out. They'll want to go again. So, but back when Shawn grew up, they hunted, him and his brother hunted. I mean, when they were in probably junior high, they hunted every night. they bow hunted. They had a friend that came over and bow hunted. And then senior high, Shawn met Mike, and Shane kind of slowed down on the hunting. He likes to hunt, but he's more about going whenever he wants to go, and he doesn't have the same passion as Shawn does. And so when Shawn met Mike, I think he found someone else at his age group that liked to hunt as much as he did in the way he liked to hunt. And that's pretty much how it took off. They went to college together, and same thing. So that's kind of how it transpired. And they both stuck with it and made a very lucrative business out of it. So
does that sound accurate, Shawn?
I was just going to say that I met Mike in junior high. We started hunting together before senior year. It was probably like junior year when we really actually started hunting together quite a bit. But
well, you met then, but you couldn't drive, so it's kind of hard to get together.
True.
Very true. I think it's interesting because like I grew up with family hunting, like mainly my cousins and uncles and my grandpa. But most of them were, I guess, like purely gun hunters, right? So we had like the family tradition of deer camp before opening day and that kind of thing. And it was probably like one of my cousins, and like my dad and I were almost like the outcasts, because, you know, by the time we hit opening day of gun season, we had been bow hunting for, a month and a half, 2 months, at that point. And so, you kind of knew some of the areas just, like the back of your hand. And so you would get to a place like deer camp and people would say, where should I go here? And it's like, no, don't go there. Like, I've already been there. Like, I know what the sign looks like. Here's where you should go. And you're almost like playing guide to some of these things. So when you can find somebody, and that's why I think Jared and I, hunt so well together, is like you find somebody that's like-minded to be like, okay, like, you're thinking what I'm thinking, and then it's an easy adaptation to be effective that way. It's important, in success, and also just to enjoy hunting, period.
It's hard to find people too that are, so like-minded, whereas it seems like you and Mike are, and I think Jeremy and I, whether we started that way or we just kind of grew in the same direction with it, I think that's one of the coolest aspects of hunting, and one that I guess is kind of discussed, but it's like, it's a strange dynamic, and that's like, a lot of people are like, man, what I love about hunting is I get that deer camp atmosphere, and like, I have all these friends that are in the community and stuff, and I think those are great things. Like, I think that's a big piece of it, but like, for me, like, bow hunting is an individual sport. Like, it's me versus like this deer that I'm chasing. But the fact that like Jeremy and I get to both retreat and have that camaraderie, with just he and I, is like, you almost need that aspect of it to like, to have fun with it still. Cause like, what good would all of that stuff be if at the end of it, I was just me sitting here with a skull cap and I'm like, look, it's, this is what I did. But the fact that Jeremy and I have that camaraderie, and that you and Mike and that you and your dad have that is really cool.
For sure. Absolutely. I agree. So I want to backtrack. Why don't you go ahead and tell that story, Dad, about Grandpa and being
I think I was probably 10 maybe. And I lived, I was born in Iowa and then lived in New Mexico and spent most of my life in Houston growing up, Texas. And so, like I said, my dad couldn't take me fishing because he was always working. So this particular time, some of the neighbors guys, they would go, and I'd always go hang out around their house, hoping they were going to ask me to go fishing. Well, these gentlemen asked me to go, and of course they're my father's age, and so we go down on this on the San Jacinto River, which is down by Houston. We went catfishing. So I was with these two adults, and we're catfishing down there, and I think we caught a couple catfish, and they were like 10 inches long, and they asked me, they go, well, what's the length limit? You know the length limit? They never asked me a 10-year-old boy. I think, well, I think they're fine. 10 inches. I think we're fine. We're good. So we kept them. And so we're getting ready to go in, and here we start heading up the river. And here comes a couple Texas game wardens in a boat. They stop us. Immediately, I knew one of them. And my head just went down, and, I'm sitting there. And of course, the two guys I was with, they got tickets. Of course, I was too young for the catfish. So the two guys I was with, they go, now, don't you go home and tell your dad about this. He'll be mad, you know, so on and so forth. So I'm like, of course, I didn't want to tell my dad anyway. You know, I was like, but my dad was pretty hardcore, been in law enforcement all his life, you know. So I go home, and it's a Sunday afternoon, and I'll never forget, my dad came home and he said, come out here in the backyard. I want to talk to you. And I'm like, oh boy, what the hell's going on here? So I was out there, and he's like, did you go fishing today? Did you guys get pulled over today? And I just started bawling. I'm like, yeah. And he handled it really good because he knew I'd already punished myself bad enough. He goes, well, he said, son, here's the worst thing about it. He said, those two guys, he said, you know, I know you knew them. He said, the bad thing was I was supposed to be working with them today, but I ended up having to go work on another case somewhere. And he says, can you imagine what it would have been like for me if I would have been with them? And we pulled you over. Of course, I got it then.
Yeah. Message loud and clear.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that you say that, Rex, because, you know, and Shawn, you're probably in the same boat. Like, I hunted a lot with my dad, you know, when I was in junior high and senior high, and then kind of as college happens and things happen, you know, you kind of drift apart. And now getting older, we're coming back together. But, you know, you have an interesting dynamic, I think, as a father-son hunting duo. Like, there were plenty of things, like, growing up, like, I always would, you know, my dad would be like, hey, you want to hunt tomorrow morning, or you want to go hunting this evening? Yeah, for sure. But, like, as we're getting there, like, I knew that I had, like, different thoughts on kind of what I wanted to do. And at some point, instead of just going along with it, I'm sure I spoke up and I was like, well, yeah, no, I'm not going there. I'm going to hunt over here or whatever. And he would be like, oh, okay, well, like, why are you going to do it? And it's like, well, you know, I scouted here, and, you know, this is where the sign is. And you start to build up, I won't say it's tension, but you definitely start to get to that point where you go back and forth as a father-son. And it's not an argument, but it's like, well, listen, like, I'm getting to the age, like, I can, you know, I know where I need to go. I know where my best. And a lot of times, especially when I was young and probably ignorant, like, he would kill a buck or he would see a buck and I would see, you know, shit, essentially. And it wasn't ever like, well, I told you so. And it is now, like, at this point in life, it's like, well, no, you know, I'll go over here, you go over there. And he'll be like, well, you know, I told you this is where you probably should have been at this point. And I think I say that because it's
I'd say it's gone past that to the point where he's asking you where you should go now.
Yeah,
it's full circle.
Back.
He's like, hey, it's a lot of work to try to figure out where I should go. He's like, I'm just gonna ask Jeremy. I know Jeremy's putting that work in.
Bring the young guys, hang the stand, and, you know, just tell me where you want me to be. But I think it's interesting because you know, he was definitely the guy who taught me to read sign and really pay attention to things in the woods. And obviously, you know, now here we are, 25 years later, the technology and cell cams and everything, which he loves, he enjoys it all, has got us to a point where, you know, I see him looking at my kids and saying, well, like, are you going to teach him to, like, you know, read rub lines and scrapes and stuff? And I do, but there's also a hell of a lot of things that are different than when I was a kid, you know? And so I don't know if it's necessarily the fact that, like, he's like, well, you know, don't let them lose that, you know, still sense of primitive scouting, but also enjoy the technologies of cell cams and everything else. But it is a weird thing, because you're right. It's come back to, like, well, you know, you kind of tell me where to go at this point.
Yeah, I'll take this one a little bit here. And we go through that quite a bit, and I don't know what it is. Well, I do in some ways. I mean, Shawn, his passion is to hunt is definitely stronger than mine now. I enjoy it. I probably enjoy it more now than when I was younger and I was going every day.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's hard to explain. I handle part of the work. He handles the deer part of it. I mean, like, when we're up here hunting, and he'll tell you this too. He gets annoyed because the deer will come out, and I'll go, "What deer is that?" You know, what do you mean? You don't know what deer this is?
Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
I mean, but he runs all the cameras. He's got the whole library on his computer. He's the one that organizes them and checks the cameras. And, you know, I'm behind his shoulder while he's scrolling through all the pictures. Oh, here's Big John. Here's so-and-so. And so when I get out there, you know, it's like, I'm not going to spend that time to do it. He spends hours on it. I do other things. I mean, you know, we've got a real nice place I built up here. I enjoy that kind of it. I'm a real hands-on guy. That's not his passion. You know, I've always been I grew up very mechanically, so I like to work on stuff doing it. And then the other big aspect of it too is I like to fish as much as I like to hunt.
That's hilarious.
So, you know, I've got my plate full. So he's into more quality than I am on the hunting end of it, and he handles that. So but I enjoy that. I really do, because when we go out, so on and so forth, he's got it planned out. He knows what to do. And I do the same thing. I ask him. Matter of fact, I'm up here right now. I'm going to try to get a guy a doe. And I'm like, well, you think we ought to hunt here, where, there, whatever. So I'll take his opinion on it. I will. It doesn't mean I'll always do it. Sometimes I go against the grain on purpose, because we know at the end of the day, it's like fishing. It's not always catching.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just fishing, and you can do some weird stuff and still be successful.
That's hilarious.
Well, let's hear Shawn's side of what he thinks.
Yeah, pretty much. You put it in put it pretty straightforward. Yeah, like it doesn't quite click, and I don't have the patience that you do with mechanical stuff. It just never has, really, and I guess it's going to have to at some point in my life. But
yeah, no, I'm in the same boat, man.
You're getting there.
I think about it all the time. I'm like, man, what if this breaks and like it, you know, it's all on me. It's mine. I own it. Whatever. I got to fix it or have someone else fix it. But anyways, yeah, back to that. Like, yeah, I do enjoy keeping track of all of the deer and the age class and whatnot, and doing all that stuff. Whereas he has his own corner that he stays in and does as far as like, he handles a lot more of the food plot stuff than I do. You know, I know what we want planted where, but and it's still obviously a learning process every year. We're still always learning with that. He's definitely a little more well-versed in that realm, I feel like, than I am. But yeah, he's right. Well, when we go hunting too, like if he questions stuff, I'll get a little snappy with him and tell him, no, that's not how it's supposed to go. But
it's not how this works, Dad.
Yeah, at the end of the day, though, too, I'm definitely not always right. There's plenty of times I'm wrong.
Well, we know the feeling too, like from personal experience. That's a nice contrast to have. You know, your dad is the landowner, it sounds like, or has been in the past, as is mine. You know, the farm I spend most of the time on, you know, my dad owns it. And the rangers and mules we run around on them, he owns them and he's responsible for them, you know. And so we're certainly grateful to all of our dads for the upkeep of, you know, all that side of things. And we're certainly glad that you are passionate about those side of things. Because I think if we had to spend as much time as you do keeping up with machines and doing the work behind the scenes, we probably wouldn't get anything done otherwise. But
I enjoy it. You know, another thing too, I think I'm just sitting here thinking, okay, you know, Shawn gets frustrated, but he gets frustrated out of passion.
Yep.
You know, like when we're out there and maybe a deer won't come in, or I've made a bad shot. There's no question about that's happened. His frustration level is much higher than mine. But I've lived through all that. Yeah, I'm not out there because I need to kill the biggest deer or I need to even kill anything. I'm out there, you know, to experience the hunt. And he wants success. He really does, because he's passionate about it. And his expectations are much higher than mine. Not that mine haven't been there in earlier life. So I think that happens with everybody. I think it's that way. You know, you guys will see it as you grow up with your kids, the same thing. Your patience level will spike with young kids. And then as they get older and you have had those great experiences, you're going to get you just kind of mellow out. It's kind of like, hey, whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah.
So
it's funny to hear you talk about, you know, fishing being a passion of yours as well. I think like where I get frustrated, or if my dad and I butt heads over anything, I'm very much like Shawn in that I take it really seriously, admittedly too seriously, probably. You know, and I know every deer, it's easy for me. I'm looking at him like, oh, so-and-so. Oh, he's this, he's this. it's like second nature to me. It's because I spend hours and I've got these things every morning. I wake up, I roll over, and I flip through my truck cam, and I know who's what and what's where, and nobody else has that like luxury or immediate access to information. And so, you know, if you know, my dad is always the one that's like, oh, you know, is this so and so or is that so and so, and it's like, are you kidding me? Like, how do you not know this? But what I like to say is, and I love my dad. We have a really good hunting relationship at this point, and we've learned to like respect each other's boundaries and stuff. I think, you know, he's more of a fisherman than he is a hunter, and that's not a dig at all.
No, I get it.
What it is this mindset of he thinks that deer are like, and I think he's coming full circle on this, so he's getting better. But we're coming from a place where my dad thinks that deer are like, you know, bass in a lake. You know, if that one doesn't work out, he's gonna keep ripping them out. You know, and there's always another one. There's always another one. And what I'm trying to like get into his head is like, no, dude, there's one. Like, you know, in certain cases, sometimes there's a handful of them, but like, listen, these are special creatures. There's a very limited number of them, and if you kill one, that has a big impact, or whatever it is. If you're hunting something a certain way, or you're doing this thing that I disagree with, or whatever, like it has a major impact. And the way that he has treated it in the past is like they're, you know, fish in a lake, and so that's where our disagreements were in the beginning. And I think over time we've come closer together, and that he's realized, you know, okay, I've hunted hard. You know, nobody will hunt. I won't take that away from my dad. Nobody hunts harder than he does. You know, he'll sit there day in and day out for the entire season, and not seeing anything worth shooting at, to where I think he's starting to realize, like, okay, you know, maybe I should ask Jared's opinion, or maybe I should, you know, do something a little differently. And at the same time, I've tried to not value the whitetail less, but just be more, just more accepting of the fact that he's going to hunt the way that he wants to hunt, you know, and, you know, we're not the same people, so I should stop expecting him to think about it exactly the same way that I do. And I think ultimately that's yielded he and I hunting better together at this point.
Yeah. You know, the hunting and fishing thing, golly, I like to fish. I love to deer hunt. I like to waterfowl hunt too, but I don't do much waterfowl hunting, just time.
Yeah.
But it's bittersweet on these animals, I can tell you. That's probably why I enjoy fishing so much more, because you can let them go and see another day. And with these deer, you know, Shawn and I, every time we kill a big deer together, we're both like, God, this just sucks. You know, you've had so much history with this animal, and this is over. This chapter is over.
Yeah, it's like super bittersweet.
It is.
It really is. We talked about it last time when I just killed my deer here a few weeks ago, a month ago, and it's like, golly, we had three encounters with him this year, and it was just so much fun. It was over that fast. The hunt just went boom. It was over, and we're sitting there going, "There's got to be more." You know, we're out there and spent the whole night just sitting there talking about it.
I mean, I think that's what we do it for, though. Is like we know that going in is like I've heard enough guys that have been hunting a lot longer than I have talk about that bittersweet feeling and how it's like, man, the farm's empty after we did that. But at the same time, you know, I can't remember the last time like my dad and I caught a fish together, and it was like one of the highest moments of our life, you know. And so
I can't get Shawn to go fishing with me.
All right. Well, we're too busy seeking that.
Yeah.
He wants to go when it's catching, not fishing.
Well, yeah, me too.
Yeah, I hear it. Well,
it seems like seldom times that I do go, it is fishing.
Yes.
And that's just how the luck plays out. I'm
just casting the whole thing. Well, I think it's interesting because, you know, my dad had primarily hunted his entire life in the state of Pennsylvania, right? And so, like, you know, growing up, it was, you know, kill the first spike you see. And then, like, I can vividly remember, like, the first hunt I ever sat with him on, I would think I was like 9 during opening day gun season. And he kills, like, I don't know, probably was a 2, maybe a 3, but probably a 2-year-old 8-point. And, like, at that time, like, you paraded that thing around.
This is the one you could see the e-cig burning across the field.
Oh, no, that
was a real cigarette at the time, and then he set it down.
I watched him. So my dad, it's just so funny. Like, the guy taught me everything I knew about hunting. And, like, when we hunted I was in high school, we hunted this small, I think it was probably 60 or 70 acre place, lots of soybean, cornfield type stuff, and just these little blocks of woods. And so like I had a tree stand on one side of the field, his was on the other. Like at that point, like I didn't even think about hunting wind or any, like I just hunted, every day. I would come from like the high school football game on like Friday night and, he'd think I walked out of like a whorehouse or something. I smelled like, cologne and perfume or whatever. And he's like, I don't understand. So anyways, I'm sitting across and it's like vivid, like remembering like the glow of a cigarette across the field. And I'm thinking like, I smell probably, but I'm like, there's no way like this guy is ever going to kill a deer, like looking like that. And I remember, like, he put the cigarette down on the V of a tree, and he shot an old bear whitetail bow that was in camo duct tape, wooden compound with fingers, and he smoked like 3 great bucks out of that tree stand as I watched from a distance. And it's just like those are the things that I'm just like mind blowing, right? And it was cool experiences because like I'll never forget it. He'll tell the same story of me killing my first deer and hearing like 4 arrows like ding 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 like through the soybean as I miss it, right? With like the 4th one actually making the mark and like the doe like just laying down in the field. But it's like those kind of experiences, and obviously we've come a long way from like that point. But like the way I hunt now, and obviously we all grow as hunters, is like I'm very particular about finding a deer, and like that's the season for me. That deer is the deer that I am going to focus on. I don't like, would I kill another one that's probably walking around? Yeah, but like I'm not hunting them. I'm hunting this deer. And he has definitely grown a lot to where now he wants to kill a big mature buck, but he's not particular about what. Like, just put me in an area where there's a good chance I'm going to do it. And, and I say that because we've taken him now outside of Pennsylvania to Kansas with us several times. And like the first, experience for Kansas with him, he's like, man, I saw like 8 bucks chasing a single doe. Like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And, but it's also the fact that you see a big buck and he's like, man, that's a giant. And it's like, yeah, that's like a big 3-year-old out here, and it's, you just aren't used to that. So here he is in like his 60s now, adapting to like what I've experienced the last 10 years of hunting in like the Midwest and stuff. And it's kind of weird because he's like a new hunter again in that sense. And I'm also like, well, yeah, I wouldn't even pay attention to that deer in Kansas. Like, these are the deer we're after. But he also is at the point in his life where I know he just likes to be out with me. Doesn't matter what happens. Doesn't matter what he kills or if he kills. Like, we killed, this last year, I killed the first day we were in Kansas, and the rest of the time, I filmed him. I sat in the tree above him. It was warm and it sucked. And to your point about Shawn's frustration, that's where I'm at. Like, he's enjoying that hunt so much, and I am frustrated to a T because I've put all this work in it, and I'm like, Dad, I just want you to get a buck, man. Like, it would be so great. And he's like, I don't care. And I'm like, well, I do. It's 70 degrees. This sucks. Nothing's happening, And it's out of frustration because I want the success for him. Meanwhile, he's already seeing it as, no, like, you don't understand. This is the success. We're together hunting for 6 days in Kansas. Like, we don't get to do this stuff.
Yeah, I think Shawn's frustration level only gets higher one time with me. It's when he lets me film him. And it doesn't happen very often.
Why is that?
Well, you can answer that. Go ahead.
Oh, well, because his experience behind the camera is just by far none. I mean, I know how to run the camera. I can do it, but I don't do it enough to be as proficient as most of those guys are. You guys are. And I'm older. There's no question about it. I mean, I probably wouldn't even be able to run a camera if I hadn't. Back in the day, I had a 35 millimeter camera, and I used to develop film and everything. So I understand how a camera functions. So video cameras, but still, there's so much on those today. There's so much you can do. It's just unbelievable. So when I go out and film him or whatever, I have to get a refresher course out there. And, he's like, oh my God, you don't remember this again? So,
yeah, but I take it all with a grain of salt when you're filming me, because I know what I'm getting myself into. I'm like,
Dad, did you get the shot? He's like, huh? What? Yeah, no, for sure. Yes.
Did you turn the second camera on? Oh, I forgot.
Yeah. I'm curious what your guys' dynamic has been. I think it's just because yeah, and I'm probably the youngest one here on this podcast, but like as like a young man, I guess, like I'm super passionate about like killing a big buck. Like right now at this point in life, like that's kind of what I'm pursuing. And I've put it on a pedestal above a lot of other things. I've made sacrifices about, like, I'm not going to spend time doing this, or, you know, I'm okay not doing that. And I'm going to solely whether it's fishing or turkey hunting, whatever it is, I'm going to put it all aside and solely, you know, pursue this one mature buck that I'm trying to kill. And I think where, like my dad and I have butted heads is that he loves to do lots of stuff. He loves to fish. He loves to, you know, bring people out to the farm and host, you know, just have friends over that, you know, whatever it is, all these things, you know, he could just have fun doing X, Y, Z number of things, you know, and from my perspective, you know, X and Z directly interferes with my goal of accomplishing Y. Like, this is my thing that I'm trying to do. And so while I know he wants to kill a big buck, you know, he doesn't necessarily value it as much as I do, or even as much as, you know, these other things that he enjoys doing on the farm. And so I've had to kind of just be okay with that, I think. And he's given some on that as well.
It's compromise.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Exactly. And you guys we do the same thing. I mean, go ahead, Shawn, tell them. Let's hear this side of this story.
Yeah, I put it on a pedestal too. I try to take it off the pedestal as well, and it's tough to do.
Yeah.
You're getting better though.
Well, because it's like, what's left, Shawn? We've invested so much in killing giant bucks that it's like if I try to ignore that goal, it's like, well, I'm empty. I'm empty inside.
It's a super fragile goal too, because like mine's a little different in that, like, my dad isn't necessarily on the properties that I'm hunting versus, you know, how Rex and your dad
It's
are.
Emotionally taxing, man. It's those highs and lows of bow hunting.
I know you've seen like your dad driving like the 4-wheeler like right by camera, and you're like, what is he doing?
Oh, well, dude, that's the definition of what I'm talking about. It's like November 3rd. I'm at home waiting for a cold front, and I get a cell phone picture of my dad driving, you know, 3 Amishmen through the just farm tours is what he calls them, you know.
Yeah, I mean, my dad doesn't do that, but like, my dad's on the same level as me with that type of stuff. Like, he doesn't do that, but yeah, it's crazy. Like, I don't know, like, I want everything, like we were saying, to be absolutely 100% perfect, and it has to be done a certain way, because that's how we're going to get the end result that we want. And so I do put it up on a pedestal like you as well, but I've had to learn the hard way too, like with things not going my way, that I got to tone it down, reel myself back in, because I mean, at the end of the day, man, it's just deer hunting, and I get it. Like, it's our passion, it's our job, that's where we're at with it. But it's like, just remember, like, that is not why we got into this in the first place. So like, just tone it down and step back into reality and realize that, like, that's not everything. And I'm at fault for that, because sometimes I put myself there where it is everything in my mind, and it's like, it's really not. Like, chill out. Well, it'll happen.
And you've got even like an additional layer of pressure on that, and that you've built a career around it. You know, people expect you to go out and be successful in the deer woods. And, you know, if things are happening, whether it's your dad or whoever else that like puts that in jeopardy, you know, not only is your goal compromised, but like, you know, there's this layer of like expectation that, you know, that's interfering with.
Yeah. And then I think about it too, and I'm like, you know what, that's life. That's how it goes for everyone. Right. So that's all relatable. Everybody deals with the same stuff.
Well, and you know what, Shawn, at the end of the day, like, I've been forced to kind of admit, so like in the same breath where I'm like, hey, it's November 3rd, I see my dad out there giving farm tours, and then I'll hunt the next 3 weeks unsuccessfully, and my dad just tags out on a fluke, you know, on a big buck. And so the realization that I've had there is that there's a lot more luck in deer hunting than I think any of us like to admit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
no question about it.
There's so much emphasis that we put on certain things, and think like there's so many things that we think truly matter, but when it all comes down to it, the cards just have to line up.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the big things that probably all of us on this call really enjoy, and it's something that we've tried to get, you know, emphasize a little bit more on this podcast, is I know I personally enjoy the off season as much as I do the actual hunting season. You know, whether that's food plots or shed hunting or just planning or running cameras, whatever it is. You know, we talked about it on our last podcast of like, I almost love it so much that I think that there's probably a chance that I'm doing more harm than good in some cases, right? Because I wouldn't say like over managing it, but I'm active in the off season a lot, thinking I'm improving the property. Where am I putting too much pressure on certain areas? Am I bumping bucks off that
just spending time there?
Yeah, just spending time, and it's because the relationship I have with my dad is. And we love the outdoors. That's one of the things that we can commonly say all the time, that we agree that we just want to be out there doing it if we have the time to do it. And so, yeah, there's that fine line, I think, on the hunting expectation side to, like, if you spend enough time out there, even if you think you are improving it in some cases, you could also be hurting it just because, some of those big mature bucks don't like that. They don't like disturbance.
Yeah, I agree. And things change every year too, to where, like just naturally that might push them somewhere else, but like you being there and changing things, whether it's little or drastic, it might just be that one thing that they don't like, to where they, like right. You're saying, they may want to just move a property over or whatever it is. But yeah, I'm the same way. Like, I mean, I know my dad is too. Like, we just want to be there and doing something and trying to improve, like you said. But it gets to a point too where it's like, okay, I've thought about this a lot. I'm like, how much more is there to improve? Like, what,
yeah,
like, are you going to go like out of your way to go do something else that may not necessarily need it? And then in the grand scheme, you actually might be doing harm to the property. I don't
know. I'm curious, and I don't know exactly what your guys' like land ownership or access situation is, but like I know that I've seen personally on the farm that my folks own that we hunt together and stuff. It seems like we've had that place for probably 6 or 7 years at this point, and we started from day one, implementing like management projects that we thought would be helpful, like timber stand improvement, food plots, just all these different things that we thought would improve the property. And at this point, like in hindsight, I would say slowly but surely that property has gotten worse and worse. As our projects have developed, it just seems like our time on that property and just being there or whatever it is, maybe it's underlying pressure from the neighbors and stuff, things that we don't see. We talked, I think, on the last podcast about like managing these properties to death. And like, it kind of seems like, easier to do than I once thought, almost to the point where I'm like, man, maybe go in there with a really specific goal in mind, spend a week doing it, and then stay away from it. Like, have you guys seen that on your properties at all? Or
I would say like surrounding pressure for sure.
That's the biggest factor
with Missouri's gun season. It kills us. I feel like when my dad first got that property, it was like 2013, I think. It was actually in really rough shape then because that was following EHD. And so like there were like 2 deer that might have been mature. I'm not even sure because we didn't have any prior history, but outside of that, it was pretty slim. And then it actually got better for sure, without a doubt. And then I feel like the last couple of years, I wouldn't say that it's gotten worse, but as far as like the age class goes, with like 3 to 4 year olds, like they're just getting smoked with guns. Or even there's a highway that's not far from there, even just hit by cars, which that's uncontrollable there. You can't do anything about that. But I think
can you hunt with crossbows during the archery season out there too?
I can, yeah. I personally don't know anyone close to us that's killed any of the deer that we've targeted. I don't know anyone that's killed them with a crossbow, but there's definitely crossbows around in Missouri. And
well, we've seen quite a bit of that. We talk a lot on this podcast. I don't even think you and I are sure at this point, like if hunter numbers are actually down or if they're up, or if it's somewhere in between where it's like all of these rifle guys are just hunting with crossbows and they're in the woods, quite a bit more.
We're somewhere in between. I mean, I know what just because I lived out there, and I think we touched on it the last one. I mean, the fact that Missouri's rifle season starts second Saturday of November,
right,
is mind blowing. You know, some of my best days when I lived there were like the Thursday and Friday before gun season started, Saturday, you know, from a hunting perspective. And yeah, I mean, if the stars align and weather's good and, you know, things are cranking, I mean, yeah, a lot of those bucks and not even just the mature bucks, but a lot of your up and comers at that 3 and 4 year range just get torched, you know, because they're just out running themselves to death and crossing so many property lines.
Yeah. And the crossbow thing, like I personally don't think that's helping with guys that are shooting out to 90 yards with the crossbow. I think that's actually gotten more gun hunters into that archery season.
It absolutely has.
With the crossbow, and that's not helping, along with our gun season, like you guys said, in the middle of the rut. Then on top of that, now we have, which we've had it, but we have muzzleloader season late in the game. I think that was like right around Christmas through the like the 4th of January. But a muzzleloader, I mean, it's
a rifle.
Yeah, it's pretty much a rifle. So if you haven't filled that gun tag through the rut, I mean, it gives guys an opportunity to come back and do that, and it's tough, man. It makes it really tough.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the other thing is, you know, and Jared and I take heat because we maybe single out crossbows too much there. And again, I have nothing against them. I think there's plenty of demographics that should be able to use them. But, you know, with the way that Missouri's structured, you know, essentially I can kill one buck with an archery before gun season, right? Then I can go and kill a buck with my rifle during gun season. And then essentially I can go kill another buck after gun season with my crossbow again. So like if I'm out there crossbow hunting, I could essentially kill a buck before gun season, kill a buck during gun season, kill a buck after gun season. And, you know, I haven't seen the stats in probably the last 6 or 7 years since my wife worked for the state, but, you know, it was a small percentage that killed 2 bucks, and it was even obviously a smaller percentage that killed 3. However, with the efficiency of these weapons increasing, at some point those numbers are going to creep up, and maybe it only creeps up 0.1% or something, but that's still a lot of bucks falling, you know, because of the ability for multiple bucks to be shot during the different seasons and stuff. So, you know, not to mention EHD and you know, in some of the northern tier of Missouri, there's CWD, and, you know, that's had drastic reductions in deer herds, not necessarily from CWD, but from state implementations. So,
I mean, at the risk of sounding pessimistic about this whole deal, it just seems like the whitetail world is getting smaller and smaller, like with, you know, crossbow seasons overlapping archery seasons, with cellular trail cameras, with baiting allowed in a lot of these different states. It just seems like, man, how, you know, they're so far and few between, you know, to be able to get access to a property that has like mature deer on it is quite a feat in and of itself. And I don't know if it's getting harder than it has been in the past, or if it's just my perception of it.
I mean, my thinking of where I get worried, I guess, let's just say hunter numbers are stable and have been stable in the last 10 years, which I don't think is the case. I think they've actually been trending upwards. But my fear is, first of all, we all know that, and not to pick on any of the state, all the state agencies are slow to respond, right? We had Pennsylvania Game Commission on, we talked about Sunday hunting, and basically I was like, whoa, you know, what were the results last year with Sunday hunting? Well, we're going to wait for 3 years and then give you the numbers. No. So what happens is if this, let's say, crossbow and the effective, I mean, there's companies putting out 500 feet per second crossbows now. If this effectiveness increases couple tenths of a %, it's a dramatic impact on our harvest numbers during the year. If we don't address that immediately and we wait and say, well, let's just see what the 3-year average is, which is typically what a state will do, that could be a massive impact on our herd before we even, you know, make an adjustment. And I think that's where I get worried about. Like, it seems like our numbers are up. There's definitely more archery hunters, whether it's crossbow or compound. If all of a sudden we become more efficient killing machines because of weapons in hand, season bag limits, the liberal positioning of the season date in the case of like a Missouri rifle season or a Kentucky rifle season, if we don't make an adjustment for 3 to 5 years because we want to just see what the average is, we could make a huge impact on this herd. And then it's like, oh shit, now what? Now what do we do?
I agree with you for sure. I think it's the way it is trending. Don't get me wrong. I love using cell cams.
Ditto.
We use them all the time, just like you guys do. But yeah, it's like, how far are we going to take this? Crossbows, same thing, baiting as well. I don't know, man. It's crazy. Like it's hard to say. Like we've just become far more efficient with success rates because of all of these things that are helping us. And I get it. Like we all want to be more successful as hunters, but like it also, it makes it easier for everyone really. And it's like, how far are we going to take this?
Well, dude, it seems like, even as like ethical bow hunters, like there's kind of like there's opportunities for things like, Jeremy and I both hunt Ohio and Kansas where you can bait, and I know that's a debated thing, like whether you should be able to do that or not. But it almost seems like, man, if you didn't do that, like even if you didn't want to, everybody else is doing it, and you're at a major disadvantage if you don't do it. You could look at cell cameras the same way. I think you could look at crossbows the same way, acknowledging that like there's a time and place for those things. Absolutely. I think as time goes on, and I just see the way that we're trending, man, at this point, dude, I would, like if it was a voting system, like we were voting for or against things, like I'm leaning towards anything that's making it harder to kill deer. Like I want deer to have the best chance possible. And if that meant, getting rid of cell cameras, getting rid of baiting, getting rid of crossbows in some capacity, and not to single those guys out, I'd be willing to make sacrifices too. Like we bait in Ohio, I think out of like necessity. It seems like I said, if you're not doing it, your neighbor is going to, and that's where the deer are going to be. I would love to eliminate those stuff. And if that meant me backtracking even off of whatever, if somebody wants to come after me for shooting a compound bow because that's too deadly of a weapon, like,
okay,
there's a line somewhere, but okay. I mean, it to just be in line with my beliefs. Like I'm willing to make sacrifices, and I want to see these whitetails thrive. Like I want them to have the best chance to survive and get to an older age class as possible. But that's hard for people because people don't want to make sacrifices. They want to be able to go out and,
I mean, we've all seen an increase. I mean, it's no, like Rex, obviously not to pick on your age, right? But when did you start bow hunting?
Oh, let's see, would have been 1979, I guess. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So think about the number of people during archery season you would see in the woods then compared to now.
Oh, it's the success rate even back then was, you start looking at the amount of hunters, but I don't look at this one as much anymore as an age thing as a different situation thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's so many different situations that we're dealing with today that, we're dealing with, trespassers, we're dealing with poachers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, poaching's still a big thing. You don't see it and hear about it, but it's happening. Trust me. There's probably in a year go by, we don't hear a story right here around here. And then you're dealing with people that don't have time to hunt. You're dealing with people that want to hunt, that don't know how to hunt. Education to me is probably the biggest thing all of us can do.
Right.
Having conversations. I love talking to people about deer hunting and educating them. And, one of the biggest problems is most people don't know how to age deer. They really don't.
Yeah.
And you don't learn that, it takes experience. It really does. And so that's another problem in it. So it's a dynamic problem. It's big.
Right.
And everybody has a different situation on what you do and how you deal with it. But I think conversations like we're having now and getting the word out and getting people educated and interested in it, as not just a 1 or 2 week thing of the year is what's going to change it, because it's definitely going to come to a head. Technology is moving up and it's going to continue to move up to make it easier for people. But as people become successful, they're going to get bored with it too.
Yep.
And, that's how I think all of us evolved. We learned more about it, and now we want to conserve. We want to teach people that, dead deer don't grow. And Dr. Grant Woods, I still say that all the time and teach people that, you've got to become educated on aging deer. So when you're out in the field, you know what you're taking, because it happens a lot. You know, and people say they killed a nice deer, but in the back of their mind going, oh God, I didn't realize he was that small. He was that young.
Dude,
and it's just education.
Yeah.
That aging deer thing, you know, I'm with you. Like that seems like the baseline for like, how do you manage deer is like, you know, aim for an age class would be the way to do it. I'm at the point now that I just like, I've all but given up on thinking that's even possible. Like, I mean, I know, I was just telling Jed last night, dude, if I had $1 for every time somebody told me that, whatever, it was a mature deer when it wasn't, or I'd have like $25-$30 probably like within the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, people are just wrong so often, you know, and it's not just like everyday hunters. It's like, you see that even on TV shows, you know, you see guys shoot a 2-year-old and they're like, that's a mature buck. And it's like, clearly it's not. Like it's misinformation, and whether they know that and they're saying it anyways, or they don't know that, which is even more embarrassing, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that's the you know, there's a couple things at play here, and it's not, we beat on it a little bit a few weeks ago on this podcast, but you know, we're all as a hunter or as a landowner, we're all under the mandates of the state wildlife department, whatever that might be in your area, right? So we as hunters and landowners, and this is more for the landowner aspect of it, have to abide by whatever those regulations are set forth from the state level. And I get that, because you can't micromanage down to an individual property level. You know, it's impossible, you know, so they're going to lay this out from a state level. The problem is that if we are active managers of a piece of ground or a couple different pieces of ground, those state guidelines are usually not beneficial to the way that we manage. They're usually too loose to how we want to manage, or in some cases, in let's say does, for instance, they're not loose enough, you know, and so that I can't harvest enough does off my property without spending an extra $1,500 on tags because I'm an out-of-state resident. And so, you know, when you have that side of it, I get it, in that you're trying to manage the resource on a landscape level. The fact is, the people who are really spending a ton of money on property management and investing into that herd itself aren't necessarily given the flexibility to manage it to the way it probably needs to be. And that's not saying that we need to lean towards privatization of wildlife. That's a whole different sensitive topic. But if you start to look at the amount of private land that is under what I would consider some sort of management activity from that landowner, it's a lot more than it was, you know, 50 years ago. And we're not adapting to that as a society, as a state wildlife level, as a country even. And so it's something that's going to come up sooner than later. I mean, you know what, Texas now is like 90+% private land. You know, and that's why they start having these like managed deer permits and all this stuff that's catered to managing your property as a private landowner. It's because most of Texas is private. I understand that Pennsylvania and Missouri and things like that are still different, in that we have a lot of public land. But how do you start to give some flex to it? Yeah, there's DMAP and there's things like that, but it's still, you know, I can't control how my neighbor harvests bucks because he just sees them and he thinks, well, I can shoot 3, so I should shoot 3. No, that's not necessarily best for the herd and for the landscape. It's just because you're allowed to do it doesn't mean that you should do it. And that's where it's a real fine line between where we're at in this efficiency of killing as a society of hunters and what actually should be harvested.
It's a complicated issue, guys, and
very complicated.
You know, obviously, Jeremy and I don't have like beef with any of these state agencies.
No.
Frankly, you know,
I know most of them.
Yeah, to try to even imagine, you know, trying to make all of these different groups happy. Like I think Jeremy and I come to this like argument with the acknowledgement that like not everybody has to hunt like us. Like not everybody has to bow hunt mature whitetails. Like that's not for everybody. It can't be for everybody. There's simply not enough resource to do that. And so, you know, you've got guys that are going to hunt one weekend out of the season so that they, it's the one weekend they can get away, or, you know, they hunt to spend time with their grandkids or whatever. And so, like, you know, Jeremy and I think just amidst all of the regulation, and while we're dealing with a limited resource, are trying to, like, make the most of it for our own situation, but also, you know, leave room for people to hunt for their own reasons.
Well, let me put us down this rabbit hole just a little bit further before we jump out. The thing that gets me, I guess, is, and I'm all for it, right? I've got a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. So, you know, my goal is to get them passionate about just the outdoors. Like, if you know, I don't force him to hunt. If he doesn't want to hunt, great. Don't go hunting. You want to hunt tomorrow? Cool. We'll go then. Where I have a little bit of frustration on the state agency side is that we have done a lot of work in the last decade to recruit and grow hunter numbers. And it's because the mindset up until recently has been, we're declining. Pretty soon we're going to be such a minority that, you know, the general public will say hunting's no good, let's get rid of it, right? That's what we've all been told. The most recent numbers from U.S. Fish and Wildlife is that's not the case, that in fact we have more hunters today than we had in 2004, basically. And so we have done a lot of liberalization to hunting seasons, to bag limits, to season dates, to the efficiency of the weapons that we're even being able to use. I mean, at one point,
dude, there's a lot of people that haven't even acknowledged that. There's a lot of people that would still say we're in a
that's why I want to have this discussion is that, you know, when I think of muzzleloader, I think like old school flintlock, because that's basically what I have to use here in Pennsylvania. Now we're talking about muzzleloaders that will shoot 500 yards from some of these precision companies. And I'm not saying that like these guys shouldn't exist, but we have not adapted the way that the season limits and dates and liberal bag opportunities and even just hunting opportunities in general have been, because it's still thinking we need more hunters, we need more hunters, we need more hunters. Guys, we're hunting a finite resource. And so now these numbers come out and say, well, we're actually up significantly from 2004. And it's like, well, what the hell?
Yeah. My friends we've all had the same discussion, and are on the exact same page as you, Jeremy. And it's wild. I just don't understand how, like, we've been told that for so long, and then now this comes out and it's not actually the case, when in reality the last, you know, decade we've been saying the same thing to ourselves, like, man, like, it just seems like there's more hunters every year, man.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, this has been hunted out here, blah blah, you know. And don't get me wrong, yeah, I do think that there's more hunters, but another aspect to it all is like the accessibility of information and finding places to go is like obviously at an all-time high, for good reason with technology and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And I'm even the one that's promoted it, you know. We promote hunting. That's our job. Sure. That's what we do. So I get it. I'm not saying that we're in the wrong in what we've done and where it's at, but like, it's just something that needs to be looked at and possibly changed to, you know, to conserve, like we're all talking about.
Well, and obviously I think there's still a way to promote hunting with the end goal of that doesn't necessarily have to be like recruitment, you know, that straightforward. Like, you know, it would be why we do it essentially, or a different style of doing it, or a different way to approach it so that it can be that much more enjoyable, or whatever it is. I don't think the end goal of promoting hunting has to be to like bring more hunters to the table.
Well, and I'm not even arguing the fact that we need restrictions, like, you know, that Missouri should go to a $1 state, though I think that would be great. Just like if Ohio got rid of baiting, I think that would be great. I'm just saying that I don't hear enough from these state agencies when things happen, when things change, to say, hey guys, what do you think? Yeah. Let's evaluate this. Or the answer I get in the case of, you know, Pennsylvania from a Sunday hunting, which, don't get me wrong, I think all Sundays should be wide open for Pennsylvania. I've been in favor of that for a long time. I just want to see the data from last year. The season has closed. Now we're almost at the second season closing. Somebody just tell me how many more deer did we or did we not harvest because of Sunday? That's all I'm asking. And
PA still hasn't released that?
They won't. They said we're going to wait till 3 years and then we'll take a look at the average.
And they won't even let you see the data.
They won't divide it down. They'll let you see the harvest data, but they won't tell you how many of those were actually harvested on the new Sundays that were open up. And that's what I'm saying. I all I'm asking is for transparency here. Just like in the state of Missouri, the fact is like, okay, cool. We can see how many people killed 2 bucks, how many killed 3. And again, it's on a reporting scale. So now you got to trust the accuracy of the reporting that's happening, which is flawed in itself. But there are things occurring and there's changes happening, and yet the public, who I think should be more involved in determining, like, hey, should we keep this? Should we change this? Is being very left in the dark until, and I get it, it's things can change. Like COVID 2020 is going to be different than this season was in 2021 in terms of participation numbers and harvest and things like that. But at least let us see it, you know. And I know you think you're preventing the fire. Frankly, I think you're preventing some of the people who are concerned to see the data. And then 3 years from now, what if it was like, oh, you know what? We increased our entire harvest by 6% because we let Sundays happen. Well, that's not a good thing necessarily. Maybe that's why I didn't see any bucks this year. I don't know, you know. So
well, in a state like Pennsylvania, it's just going to look at license sales. They're going to say,
and that's where it goes back to the catch per unit effort. Is like these guys don't care about making mature bucks. They care about sell and opportunity.
I'm on the same page. I agree with that. I feel like a lot of the state agencies are all about you know, license sales, and it's unfortunate because that's, you know, we obviously want far more than that. That really doesn't, I don't know. Well, there's other ways for them to generate revenue. You know, it's obviously, it's not my career. I'm not involved in the agencies and there's the decisions they make. They probably know far more than I do in that realm, but
maybe
there's got to be other ways to generate revenue.
It's all based on federal dollars, right? It's area public land mass and hunter license sales that ultimately lead to a federal fund that is then divvied up amongst the states. But a state like Missouri has a sales tax in place, making them the richest department in the country.
They are.
Right? Clearly, they are. And so what I'm advocating for here is we haven't changed the system. The reason that we're so concerned about hunter numbers and opportunities is because the system is still based on how I get those federal dollars to the state. I'm not necessarily even blaming the state in that manner as much as, hey, should we not, like, things have changed in the last 100 years. Let's take a look at what Pittman Robertson did, and it was great. Now, how could this, like, how have things changed? Because we're spending way more money on equipment as a hunting community than we used to. All of those lead into the PR fund. We're spending a lot more money on travel and economy boost to these local areas, like
on private land management too.
Nobody used to go to Kansas to travel in November. Now it's full of hunters because it's an awesome state to go hunt if you can get a tag. And so things have changed and evolved dramatically in the last 50 years. That hasn't. It hasn't changed. It's been very much stagnant into this is how the algorithm forms and this is the calculation and this is how much money this state gets.
Well, that simple fact that like some of these state agencies anyways are geared for like generating revenue. That simple fact, I think, puts them at odds with private land managers, you know, and the fact that, you know, as a landowner, we want to do what's best for the herd, right? And so we're improving habitat. We're trying to get deer to a certain age class. You know, meanwhile, the state is just trying to bring as many hunters to the public lands or to the state in general as possible. Those two things they're counterintuitive. You know, they're working against one
another. If you're a public land hunter, like ultimately there is a finite amount of public land. The more people you put on it, the least chance that you have of being successful. It's not like people will say this. We get this all the time, guys, because Jared and I we hunt public land where we have to or where we need to. But we're also very passionate about private land management and wildlife management on our own ground. But it's also because, like, guys, listen, you don't want more people hunting your public land. There isn't. Well, there's not enough room.
That's the paradox, and that like a lot of people, at least traditionally, haven't wanted to say is that like, as hunters, like if we sit here in this table, we're like, well, we want an industry and we want innovation, we want, you know, cool new products. Like we enjoy that aspect of it, but who here wants to see another hunter in the woods? Like, raise your hand. You know. No, there's nobody. So it's like, it's such a double-edged, it's a weird conversation to have.
It really is. It is. I was sitting here thinking about that, like what I said about cell cams. I absolutely love them. I do. It saves us so much time and effort and everything. But like I was saying, like, how far are we going to take this? Like, it's changing. Everything's changing because of all of that. And like you said, Jared, like with seeing another hunter there, especially if you're on public, you're like, oh, this is I found this hidden gem. And then all of a sudden, bam, you find boot tracks. You're like, wow, someone was just here. Whatever it may be. Like,
Shawn, since we spoke last, that was before our mule deer hunt in November. So we didn't draw in Kansas this past year, which is, the first in a couple of years. So, I guess not to put the cart before the horse, a lot of other people we found out were in the same boat, whether they didn't draw for Kansas or they didn't draw for Iowa, or they didn't put in for those states. They were just looking for an over-the-counter opportunity. We found ourselves in southern Illinois at the Shawnee National Forest, which is huge. It's like 600,000 acres of public land down there. And in our minds, Illinois is Illinois. Man, that should be a good trip. We should be able to get away from people and find some big deer. Wasn't the case. We went out and spent a week there, and just were running into guys left and right, and we weren't alone. We saw some other guys that we knew were kind of in the area having the same experience. Colton and I hunted hard for 7, 8, 9 days. I didn't see a deer over 2.5 years old. And what would happen is we would get to these spots that
we scouted them in the spring and summer.
All we have is maps basically to go on, maps and word of what to look for and stuff, a sign. And so we would go in and find these like great looking spots. We're like, man, this is Illinois. This is what I had in mind. Seems sweet. We would go in and like after 2, 3, 4 sits, like we'd start seeing things. I'm like, is that it? Like there's gut pile over there. Like, oh, there's tracks over here. Oh, there's night eyes plugged into this tree. And like, ultimately, you come to find out all of these spots have just been like hunted hard for weeks and weeks and weeks, and like we're not seeing the deer, and it's not a great experience for me, let alone like a brand new hunter. So one of the guys we took with us has hunted with me on my farm. He's a young bow hunter, has had some success. He put in for us or with us for Kansas, and I was looking forward to him getting to experience that, and that didn't happen. So we took him along to Illinois with us, and, day one, he's getting yelled at by guys out of tree stands, and, there's 5, 6 trucks in the parking lot, and same thing, gut piles, he's walking past, not seeing deer. And it's just like, dude, this is not hunting. Like, this is not the experience that we wanted to have here. And so I don't know, we kind of just have like a bad taste for, hunter numbers, and obviously we're going to keep hunting public land, but man, if that's the experience people are going to have on public land, like, trust me, there's better things out there. And unfortunately, they seem to be on private land.
Mm-hmm.
At least on the Midwestern states. I know the West is, still has some room there, but.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's really, really tough. I had an Iowa tag this year, and I stuck to public land, and looking back now, I wish I wouldn't have, just because yes, I had success the year before. But gosh, there was a lot of luck that went into play to it. And, looking back now, it was so tough. There was still a lot of pressure on the public land that I was hunting, running into, another thing is I was running into cell camps all the time.
Really?
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, dang, I didn't, I actually didn't run into them, the year prior to, but I did this time. And I was like, geez, man, there's just nothing's untouched. And it made it really, really, really tough. And I didn't end up filling the tag, which sucks, but it is a reality, and it happens. But it just, I don't know. It's like one of those things, like it's tough in the Midwest, really, really tough in the Midwest. It's been very tough to just hunt public land in general. And man,
it just seems like you have to go further and further. Like, and so for us, like,
but it's finite. I mean, you can only go so far before it's like, there is no more.
It's like you have to go all the way to like Kansas or all the way to Oklahoma, or wait 5, 6 years to draw in Iowa, and I'm sure there's opportunity. Like, all that has to happen is a big deer has to be there. Like, It's not like this area is good and this one's not, generally speaking, I guess you could say there just has to be a big deer there. And ideally they're unpressured. We want to hunt unpressured whitetails as much as possible. I think that's what we're seeking. Like, that's what we have fun doing, but it's just turning into more and more like, the accessible states are pressured, and, they don't necessarily Well, they're harder to find. Those experiences we're looking for.
So Rex, are you primarily just hunting the home farm there in Missouri, or are you traveling with Shawn and the guys to go other places?
I do some traveling, not as much as they do, of course, but yeah I've hunted out in Wyoming. I mean, I've hunted all out west, but whitetail just here in Missouri, actually.
Yeah.
So
Rex, are you
probably going to be hunting Kansas next year, though?
Are you full-time bow hunter at this point? Full-time Heartland?
Am I?
Yeah.
What do you call full-time?
Yeah,
I'm the full-time get it done boy for him, I guess.
Gotcha. Awesome. So you're retired outside of,
I'm retired. Yeah, if that's what you're asking. Yeah, I retired, I don't know, 6-7 years ago.
Cool.
So,
well, in Kansas, Kansas is a state, like, obviously, like, I think that was the first state my dad ever hunted out of Pennsylvania. We took him to Kansas, and like I said, it was like, oh, this is what deer hunting is actually. Yeah. Actually, like, but there's a state that, frankly, I'm a little concerned because the number we got didn't get drawn, so now we've got a preference point where, for 8 years straight, it was like draw every year. And now you look at the number of people applying there, like at some point that state is probably going to feel the effects of that. Like there's a reason Kansas is so great. It's got massive deer area, right? Landscape for them to hide. But as more pressure comes into that state, eventually the one thing that made it so good was the age structure. I mean, you could kill, I killed an 8-year-old buck. I probably saw 9 and 10-year-old deer out there. And all of a sudden you're going to start seeing that age structure come down to where, you're probably going to have to work to find 4 and 5-year-old bucks in Kansas, and that won't be fun.
Well, and it's not that we don't like to work. It's just that's 17 hours away, and it's damn near impossible to get out there other than the week we're actually hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was thinking about that while we were all talking about this, about how I feel like, there's no hidden gems. I remember, it was just 5 to 10 years ago, people would be like, what's your favorite state? And, I might say something like, I feel like actually, 10 years ago, I would have been like, well, man, I feel like South Dakota is kind of like a hidden gem. Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I don't think that really exists anymore. And back to what I was saying too, like we're all probably at fault for that because we're, we promote all
we're
that.
All promoting
that's our job, and that's what we do. And I get it. But we're kind of at a crossroads now. I feel like where there's nothing's gone untouched anymore, and it's tough. I don't know the answer to it. I really don't, other than just find ways to kind of conserve things. And I don't know if there's not a perfect proper way to go about it, but I just think we need to reevaluate certain things, and in all states, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, when you start to look at some of these states, like you bring up South Dakota and stuff, it's not that all the big bucks are getting killed. It's that the biggest killer of big bucks is pressure. And so when people get into areas, that pressure essentially buries that deer, right? And you can be a great hunter and you can read sign and you may get lucky, but every bit of pressure that's put onto these places makes it harder and harder and harder to kill that deer. And I think what you end up starting to see in some of these places where I fear is that I do think that there is a lot of new hunters coming into this. Apparently, according to the data, there's a reactivation, whatever it might be. Where I get worried is the harder it is to be successful, the quicker that peak number is going to start to drop fast, real fast, because in today's society, our attention spans are nothing. And so if these new people come in or these new reactivations come in and it's, they have an experience like we did on public land in Southern Illinois, they're going to be like, yeah, this is why I gave up hunting or whatever. And so all of a sudden we're going to be riding this false high that's going to fall out from underneath us. And then we are going to have an issue, right? We are going to have trouble. So it's great that we're at these numbers, but again, it's a limited resource, no matter what state you live in. So,
well, dude, in addition to just like, these deer being harder to kill and stuff, like there's just something about being in the wilderness, like, with even if it's just the perception of like people haven't been here, if not ever, even recently. Like, I know one of the first times we went out to Kansas and like there were some parts of North Dakota, I felt like this is just magical. Like this is just like a totally different world. It's like I get to step into this thing, and it's like it's untainted by human pressure and stuff. And so, you know, whether we're seeing the deer or not, like there's just a feeling, you know, and I hate to keep throwing public land like into the ring on this one, but it's like it tends to be on public land that it's like you don't get that feeling. Like it's just like people have been here, like there's sign of it everywhere, and you just kind of miss out on that whole part of the experience that I think we're seeking out for 1 or 2 weeks out of the entire year. It's like I want to go somewhere where people aren't and spend time, you know, just in God's creation. I just want to be out there, you know, and not see people.
It's hard to find.
That's the thing that I think is the saddest for me is like, because when we went to Illinois, and you know, not to throw Illinois under the bus, I'm sure there are parts of Illinois that are still awesome, you know, but when we went out there, like I was expecting an experience of like remoteness, to be able to get away from people, to just enjoy that. And we didn't get it. You know, I felt kind of robbed of that.
Well, I mean, to piggyback on the whole public thing, it's just as bad as private, because we've had, I don't know if it was, I think it was Don Higgins and a couple other guys we were talking to, you know, they bring up Pike County, Illinois, which, you know, at one point in time, Pike County, Illinois was the Mecca, right? When people said that name, you're like, yeah, giant bucks there. These guys are telling me, and again, I haven't hunted there, I haven't been there, that it's like the most overrated part of any whitetail county in the world at this point. Like that Pike County is not the Pike County that everybody thinks it is anymore. And I'm sure there's still individual farms in that area that do produce, but as a whole, you know, that area had basically gotten, you know, commercialized from an outfitter standpoint. And then lease prices came in, and guys from out of state, you know, came in and you know, killing 130 or 140 inch deer at one point was great, but like that place, those were 3-year-olds, right? And so the mature buck's age structure just continued to decline to where, you know, a lot of people will tell you like, yeah, like I wish I didn't buy here, or I didn't have a lease here.
You know, I'm sorry, I want to let you guys respond. I don't mean to keep jumping in here. What I just said there, I think I answered my own question of like, so we debate or have conversations with a lot of guys that claim that they're like, public land is where it's at. They really enjoy the challenge of hunting these pressured animals. I can appreciate that, but I think what I just said there, at least for me, is the reason that that's not what I prefer. Like, I want to be humbled by the landscape and by like just the wilderness, and like, you know, you're not going to get that out of a highly pressured piece of land. Even if I go and kill a big buck there, like that's cool, and yeah, that is what I'm trying to do, you know. But even I think more than that, like I want to just experience like being away from people. And you know, typically I do think that overlaps with opportunity to kill big bucks. Like they also want to be in a remote place, right? But yeah, that public land stuff, those experiences are much harder to find.
I feel like I've talked to a couple guys that are completely different than they were like 4 months ago.
Yeah. Well, that said, we're gonna.
And I get it. Yeah. Like I get exactly where you're coming from. Like,
yeah. Well, and I do think, like, to your point, Shawn, I do think, you know, even though they're getting some more pressure, I still think the Dakotas, you know, some of those more western states.
Oh, I love those places.
Are in a little bit different situation than like Southern Illinois, for instance.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, or Ohio.
Oh, but to your point, like there's nobody. I don't care if you are just I hunt public land for the challenge. Nobody is set up in a remote spot in public land and then sees a guy walk in on him and says, "Yeah, that's cool." Like nobody does that.
Love that.
Yeah, nobody does that. Nobody says, "Well, challenge accepted." No, you get mad.
Well, no.
Man.
There are some.
There is nobody that says that. Nobody says a guy walks in, pumps up 80 yards from him. They're like, "Hey, man, challenge accepted."
Just a week or so ago, we talked to John Eberhardt. Do you guys know who that is?
I feel like I do. I know the name.
He's known for, you know, Rex. He's probably maybe even 10 years older than you are, and he's been hunting out of a saddle. Like he hunted with, you know, tethered.
He's high pressured.
That's his
Michigan, like high pressured public land.
And he'll tell you, he's like, anybody can kill a buck in the Midwest. It's easy. He's like, I get satisfaction out of killing bucks that everybody shot at, or you know, nobody can find, like in these really high pressure areas. And I was like, well, it's interesting. You know, I can understand how that, you know, you might get that sense of accomplishment. It's just a different thing, but it's a shame that those don't offer that experience of, you know, it being in the wilderness that I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. It's just a different thing, I guess. He's adapted. Yeah. I haven't.
That's tough.
He's got a different expectation, though.
Yeah. That's it. That's exactly
all this boils back to it.
That's it.
Yeah.
We as hunters, if you went and quarried hunters today, the amount of different expectations you're going to get out of people is just off the map.
Yeah.
And then you start talking about land management. We start talking about public property and these conservation departments. Do I think they can do a better job? Yes. But they have to deal with all of this. They have to put all this together, put us all in this big bowl and figure out how do we manage all these people, all these resources, and make everybody happy. Yeah. Well, it's not going to happen, guys. It just ain't going to happen, because here we are at where we're at and what we do. It's mainly because we've had the opportunity to go out and experience all this stuff, where you have a lot of these younger hunters and hunters that don't have the opportunity to have jobs and can't go do this. They just want to get out there, so, and then, and we're all trying to put all this in one basket. It's not going to happen. I think what's going to happen here is, with regard to public property, in these areas where it's getting overpressured, it's going to have to be managed, and it's going to have to be quotas of who hunts where, when. Yep. They're going to have to go to that point for everybody, because, there's a safety factor involved in it too. And then when you looked at private land ownership, we got to create more co-ops among ourselves. I mean, where landowners get together and get on the same page and put their expectations together so that they can manage the properties on a bigger level. And that's hard to do. It really is. I mean, Missouri Conservation Department promotes it and they try to put it together, but it still boils down to each individual landowners. Do they want to fall into that game and play that game? Yeah. And there you go again. It's the expectations of what each individual person wants. Mm-hmm. And I talk about it and think about it all the way along. And I wish I had an answer to it all, but I don't yet. But it's all going to come to head. I mean, the public property thing alone, technology hasn't helped that. Technology's made it so easy too.
What do you think that looks like, Rex? You keep saying it's going to come to a head. I mean, what do you think that
well,
looks like?
I think all the things you guys talked about, and I think some of this public property runs in cycles. I really do. I mean, it runs in cycles where, like, you go have a bad experience, you're not going back. Well, you're one of probably 20 people that had that bad experience. So everybody goes away. Well, there's a small group of guys that go, wow, nobody's going to hunt it. I'm going back in, and it starts over again. Yeah. I see it here in Missouri. Missouri's got a ton of public property, and we got a piece up here that I don't think gets hunted a whole lot for archery. And we've talked to people that have killed some nice deer off of it. Well, that word gets out and boom. It goes right into it. People start hunting it again. But I think the answer to it, though, is going into some of these properties and experimenting with a quota type system where you let guys go in and they hunt a prescribed area for prescribed time. And, then, they feel like at least they have a little more control over their destiny.
Well, and that's where I think the Deep South,
I would be up for that.
The Deep South is ahead of us on that. If you look at, I'll use Mississippi, for example, because that's where, I live. There were some places that were open to hunting, year round. Most of that area was quota based. And a lot of that area was you had to kill a doe first before you could shoot your buck. And so when you have these control factors in that kind of mindset, you by default control the amount of pressure in those areas. And so I think as you start to look at kind of what some of these states have done down there even, and I'll use Mississippi as that example, yes, they have less hunters than most of our Midwest or Northeast states, but it could be adapted and it could be used. I do think that, Kansas will be the next one who's forced to adapt something like in Iowa, where you're going to need at least one, if not two preference points at some point. Because if they don't, it'll get out of hand really quick. So, it can happen. It could get adapted. I think what people have to realize, though, is almost all of us will start our hunting career on public, right? It's not, unless you have family on farm or you have really good access to someone, you're gonna hunt public at some point in your life, and you're gonna have positive experiences. I hunted the city property in Columbia when I lived there, and I killed a lot of bucks off of that property. and it was public, wide open in the public. I had to go to like a 1-day course basically to be qualified to hunt it. But then, yeah, man, I killed tons of bucks. And I killed tons of bucks on the conservation areas. You can do it, and it's going to make you a better hunter. I mean, I attribute a lot of my success on private ground because I had to bust my balls to figure out how to kill deer on public. I think that any hunter, though, and Eberhardt's probably, the outlier of the group.
For sure.
But any hunter eventually wants more, right? Or, it took only so many guys to hunt some of these same places that I was in to figure, like, this is just, like, it made hunting miserable. And that's not what it's supposed to be. You're supposed to love it. You're supposed to enjoy it. It only takes a few times of being in the spot you think's the right spot to get walked in on, and guys pump up 50 yards from you to say, yeah, forget this. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so to say kind of brashly that you're like, well, no, I'm only going to ever hunt public because it's the challenge of it. Frankly, I think it's because you don't have the option to hunt private. And that's okay. But don't go bashing anybody that's wanting to manage and hunt private because they have the opportunity. And it's a fine line there, but it's something that I'm hearing more and more from certain groups, which is, yeah, like anybody can go onto your property and kill a giant buck. Apparently not, because I can't. Like it's just one of those things that, like, you can't judge me because you're not in my shoes, and I'm not going to judge you for being in your shoes, but don't say that you'll never hunt private and you'll always hunt public, because I don't think that'll be the case, especially if you are granted access to private. I don't know. It's just what I said.
Yeah. No, and another thing that I was thinking about too is like timing. Like, we're on here kind of complaining about public places that we've gone and hunted this year or over the past couple of years, and it's been crowded and whatnot, which I've run into that plenty of places. But I also have to tell myself too, I'm like, look, dude, you're here for a week and you're like visiting this certain piece of public that you think is overcrowded, like 2 days out of the season or whatever. Well, if you're local to that area, you can obviously monitor those situations, and there's definitely times across the season, days throughout the season where nobody's there, and it's actually
like you're saying, Shawn, there's definitely an aspect of like residents versus non-residents that, maybe we don't acknowledge enough, but that's because we're not from a big buck state necessarily. We're usually on the traveling end of it as opposed to the people traveling to us.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Nobody wants to come hunt Pennsylvania.
But that's also one of the cool things that Jeremy and I get to experience is like, I think a lot of people, when they get a taste of something like Kansas or Iowa, are inclined to be like, to move there. They're like, I'm all in. This is where I'm going. And I think that, I don't know if this is the right word. There's a kind of like a diminishing return to that, whereas, I've been places where big bucks live, and like generally speaking, it's not necessarily somewhere I want to live. It's the remote, and there's not a whole lot there. And so like Jeremy and I enjoyed living here in southwestern Pennsylvania. And one of the cool things that we get to experience is going to these destinations that have big bucks and bringing them back, And so if I go to Kansas and I kill a 160, if I was local to that part of Kansas, they're like, great, I saw 3 of those on the way to work. But when we bring it back here, guys are like, that's the biggest freaking buck I've ever seen. Like, that's amazing. And that's a pretty cool aspect that Jeremy and I get to experience.
What's the expectation side? And I get that. And I think one thing that Jared and I've kind of come to terms with, guys, and I'm sure you're the same way, is like, as much as I want to kill, a 5.5-year-old buck here on the mountain in Pennsylvania, there's a chance that there isn't one on the mountain. Like, he doesn't exist. So, at some point I have to kind of say to myself, well, like, what is the best buck on the mountain? And that's probably the deer I should target and kill, right? Because if I have expectations of, I want to kill this 5.5-year-old and he doesn't exist, and there hasn't one that existed in multiple years, like, I'm going to be pretty disappointed every season.
Yeah.
Yep.
For sure. Absolutely. I agree with you on that.
So
it's great.
I guess from, one of the questions I kind of had for you guys, and maybe looking here even to the 22 side, because, all of us are having pending seasons about to close.
We're rounding the corner here.
Yeah, we're rounding the corner. Like, what gets you excited, here in the next 30 days even? Is it sheds? Is it who makes it through? Is it planning for food plots? Like what
help us regain some optimism.
Yeah,
from the shell of a man that we are at this point.
What pulls you through the next 30 to 60 days?
I would say, yeah, just planning for next year and just kind of trying to figure out, what I can improve, whether it's not even from a land management side. I hadn't even gotten into this, but I'm shooting a really heavy setup on my bow. And I missed a buck last week at 41 yards out of a blind. And, we played it back numerous times. Like the deer's, he's eating, chowing down on beans. It's loud. And he's still ducks my arrow. Like it would have been a perfect shot. And
how many grains are you shooting on your arrow?
I think I'm shooting don't quote me on it, but I think I'm shooting 512. And
70
that's not the heaviest setup out there, but it's heavier for me from what I've shot in the past. And it just blows my mind, how that can happen still. And then I shot at a doe the following day at 29 yards, same exact thing.
Give us some more context here, Shawn. How many pound bow are you shooting?
I'm shooting a 70-pound bow, a 28-inch draw.
And so what is that? What do you get?
245 feet per second, which is pretty slow. I feel like.
Yeah, that's extremely slow.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pretty dang heavy setup for me.
Time to back it down.
Yeah, I'm going to go back down. And that's a learning experience for me. I haven't really tinkered with that stuff too much over the years. I've kind of had the same thing, I would say, for a while. And then I've gotten heavier and heavier over the last few years because I wanted more penetration. But I think that I need to step it back a little bit and start tinkering with that. And that's one thing that I have not messed with too much in the winter months, because like most of us, oh wow, deer season's over. I'm gonna set the bow down for a month or so. And that's probably what I'm not gonna mess with. Well, that's what I actually want to start messing with. And what better time than now, really, rather than the traditional, it's June, July, I'm really going to start ramping things up and start, messing with stuff. And that's where I've actually caught myself. In fact, last time we spoke, I had things going wrong, and that's my own fault.
Well, Shawn, we should stay in touch on that stuff. Jeremy and I kind of went down that rabbit hole 2.5 years ago. We're not experts by any means, but we've definitely vetted a few different products and companies, and have found a setup that works really sweet for us. I think at least I did. I don't know if both of us went kind of too heavy initially, and we gave up a lot of that speed.
We changed when we started to go to the Dakotas, because it was maybe I won't take the shot at 80, but I want to practice the 80 and at least shoot to 60. And then we were so heavy, it was holy shit, that deer's going to be gone by the time it gets to him.
Yeah, and that's I was okay. I truly was. I was okay shooting under myself personally. I was I'm not going to take a shot over 45-50 this year. I was fine with that. Spot and stock out west for whitetails here. I was perfectly okay with that and accepted that at 100% because I wanted to sacrifice that for more penetration. But I obviously I'm learning still. We're always learning and tinkering and changing things. But another thing that I feel went into play with that buck last week in the doe, I think it had to do with a blind, in a fiberglass blind, which I typically only hunt out of a fiberglass blind late season when it's super cold that. Most of the time I'm in a tree stand for the most part earlier on. And I think that sound was actually echoed as well.
Interesting.
In my opinion, but like I said, we're always learning. I'm never going to have it always completely figured out, but
we're in that hole right now. I mean, we just had, I guess when this drops, that podcast was right. We just had Troy Fowler from Ranch Ferry on, and he's kind of been that guy who's it
was him and a aerospace engineer, a guy that worked for the DoD for 25 years studying ballistics,
and these guys,
he was the guy. He had a big dummy arrow, and
they're shooting 600 grain arrows that.
I watched their stuff. I knew that they were shooting even heavier setup than me.
Well, and Warburton and those guys at Hunting Public, they're the same way. Giant single bevels, and Jared and I are I get it. In theory, it makes sense, but I'm also not willing to give up that speed because of distance and muscle reaction of the deer. It's not just gravity. It's that deer will physically move and react.
Speed and cutting surface in way of a mechanical broadhead would be an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
We think there's kind of such a thing as too much momentum, if there is such a thing. Like, obviously, you want to blow through it 100% of the time, but if you could still do that and achieve greater speed and greater cutting surface through something like a mechanical broadhead, I think Jeremy and I are advocating that, at least for us, we're going to.
Yeah.
You know, and so, like, for that reason, Shawn, like, to contrast your setup, for example, like, well, let's do yours, because you're shooting 70 pounds. So you're doing 70 pounds. How heavy is your arrow?
430.
430. Okay, so maybe roughly 100 grains less than yours, and you're shooting what, 280, 290?
287.
Right? So, you know, someone might argue you want a little more speed, but I mean,
But my FOC is still at 15, 16%.
16%. That's because we're shooting micro diameter arrows with, you know, Ethics Archery outserts weighted at the front.
Yeah, I'm not shooting the Ethics Archery, but I'm shooting micro diameter arrows.
Well, I'm shooting the Victory insert. So that's what I've got. Yeah. I've got, what is it, 60, 65 grains?
Yeah, something like that.
55 grains up front.
Yeah, we need to talk about this more, because it's something over the last 2 years I've really tried to research heavily, and I see both sides of it now.
I do.
I was starting. I kind of went like the
Ranch Ferry route
a little bit for the most part, and then now I'm like, after I watched that happen, I was like, all right, you know, I don't think there's an absolute perfect way. I think there's a happy medium, and obviously it sounds like you guys are kind of
we're getting there. We're not there yet. It makes sense for Troy because he's trying to shoot through the shoulder of a hawk.
Yeah, the biggest, baddest pigs in Texas.
I'm not. Right. I'm trying to kill a whitetail or a muley, and I want penetration. But he's also and he said it in our podcast. He said, listen, he's like, those animals will die within sight. I see them or I hear them fall, right? My sense is there's going to be times I don't make the best shot. I want blood. I want to be able to track and find that deer.
I'm the exact same way, and I've experienced both cases of that. Like, you know, I was only fixed blade broadheads this year with that heavier setup, and both bucks that I did kill, same thing. Like, they died in sight, or I heard them both crash. I for sure heard them both crash when I saw fall. But another thing that I've noticed also with the fixed blade broadhead is the blood trail isn't anything like it is with a mechanical. But like I said, I watched them or saw them fall, so that's different.
And that's because you hit it in the right place.
Yeah,
you know. Exactly. So those fixed blade broadheads don't necessarily give you the forgiveness. Like, if I shoot something in the guts, I want the biggest broadhead on there I can physically get on there.
Yeah. And I spent countless hours, my dad knows this, tinkering with my bow to make sure it was tuned to like a T, along with tuning my arrows and all that, tuning all
bear shaft tuning and stuff. So we're we're in it. We're deep at it this time. I get Troy's point.
I want to say,
but I disagree in a lot of cases.
We're approaching it from a practical standpoint. Like, we've had conversations a lot of these momentum heavy FOC guys, and there's a lot of validity and truth to what they're saying. Jeremy and I are just saying, I get it. I just think there's room for some of these other things that, as whitetail bow hunters, we need to keep in mind as well, which would be, penetration,
speed,
blood trail, speed. Exactly.
Yep.
All those things. There's another thing too. Like, so, some of like Mike and Nate and some of the guys that I hunt with or whatever, we were all talking about it, and that was the conclusion we came up with, was like, oh wow, your arrow's traveling slow, that's why you duck, blah blah blah. Maybe you should consider changing arrow setups later on in the season. And I was like, I'm not going to go through that whole process.
Yeah, no, that's heartburn.
That said, one thing that's kind of unclear, Shawn, is I don't necessarily know that even if you were shooting 320 feet per second, that it would have saved you. It would have killed that deer necessarily. Like, they drop so fast. That's something I don't know.
That's what's crazy though too, is so it's that 41-yard shot. You can see the arrow enter the frame. I don't know the exact distance, but I bet the arrow was within 30 feet of him before he starts to react.
Wow.
Shawn, I think you're onto something with the blind. I mean, both those times you're hunting out of fiberglass. I killed my deer 20 yards from there, a month ago in a bail blind.
Yep.
30 some yards, almost 40. And the deer didn't move.
I know. I understand that. Yeah.
How fast does sound travel?
Plays a bigger factor than a lot of people realize. If the deer can't hear anything, he's not going to duck.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Well, and that is, again, one of these heavy arrow bandwagon, which I was kind of, but now I'm definitely not, is the heavier the arrow, the more quiet the bow and arrow is. That's at least the theory behind it.
Well, and if that were the case, granted, this blind may have played a factor, but like a lot of these FOC guys, Shawn, would have said, you're shooting the right setup for that. He's not going to hear it.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
Yeah, I know. And then another thing too, like the redneck that I was in has like, it's layered with foam, like to dampen the noise. So I don't.
There's a fine line. I get both ways, you know, and we're not experts.
Okay, so we're not going to beat this. 1,088 feet per second is how fast sound travels.
Okay, that makes sense.
You might want to dial our bows up a little bit.
Crank her down a little bit. Hey, some of these crossbows are halfway there.
I was just getting ready to say that.
That said, Shawn, you can definitely handle an 8-pound bow, dude.
Yeah. 80? Is that what you said?
100%.
He doesn't need one, dude. I don't need one.
Yeah,
I could too.
But if you can, you should, because you're going to get more speed and more momentum out of it.
I know. Bowtech did just come out with
science.
An 80-pound bow.
It's science.
Simple science.
I actually thought about trying.
Look at Rex's face when you said that. He's like, you're crazy.
I shoot 60 pounds. That's all I've ever shot. I just don't. I mean,
yeah.
Who was that? Carson's wife shoots 65 pounds, doesn't she?
65, yeah, man. That was and she's not a big girl at all.
No.
I was raised, and though I can't probably do it, my dad would always be like, listen, your bow weight should be whatever you can do if you were actually on your head upside down.
Well, here, Shawn, I'll give you an example of what you can do, like with an 80-pound bow, which is what I'm shooting. I'm shooting 470 grain total arrow setup at roughly 300 feet per second.
And you were heavier. You were in the 5s.
Yeah, I was a little heavier. I was shooting, like 5'11", 5'12", kind of where you were at, and I was at like 280, and even that wasn't fast enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew I was shooting slow, but like on the bow that I'm also shooting, I have the comfort setting, and I could change it to performance where it's shooting faster, but I want to go for the
that's interesting.
Well, we do too. So. Is that 80 versus 85 on the let off? Is that what that is?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yep. Well, dude, I'm typically in the line of thought where I want, performance, so I want less let off. But I was shooting that on the Carbon Spiders, what I shot for 3-4 years. On this new RX5, it's not enough for me. I'm shooting the 85-pound let off, 85% let off. Rather,
a lot of the things that we're hearing, Shawn, are based on theory and science and math, and I get that, and that's where Ranch Fairy and these guys, Daryl was the aerospace engineer that was with us talking, and I get it. I'm not arguing their facts.
If anything, we were affirmed by the conversation with Ranch Fairy.
From a practicality of in the stand, number one, I want accuracy. I want blood when it hits, right? And that kind of goes in tandem with penetration, but it also doesn't. Like, I want a giant hole when it hits, and if I don't get an exit, I still find that deer. And I want some speed, and that's really the three things from a practicality standpoint on a whitetail, which is why I give a lot of these crossbow guys shit, because I've never heard of a crossbow guy thinking about FOC and forward weight and stuff like that on their bolts. They're just blowing a 22-inch bolt out of a 500 feet per second crossbow, and there's other things that go with that I think that they can make it a more efficient shooting machine. I just don't think most of them, just like we were, like I, wasn't but 5 years ago, it was like, oh, shoot the lightest arrow I can find to get the most speed, period. And that obviously isn't right.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track there, Shawn. It's just, if you want more speed out of it, you just got to reduce the weight or increase your poundage.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
That's what I'll be tinkering with here in the next month or so.
Yeah, ditto.
What was that?
That's what I'll be messing with the next month or so.
Cool.
I'll probably take a break a little bit from like really honestly, like with deer not having shed, I don't even jack with anything on the farm for at least another month or so.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Makes sense.
Cool.
Rex, what are you doing at the farm this weekend?
We're going to try to kill a couple does tonight and tomorrow night, finish the season up, and then I'm coming home.
There you go. Do you guys usually go in, Shawn, you're the camera guy, so do you guys go in with an idea of how many does you want to shoot on the farm each year?
Yeah, we argue about it.
Yeah, we do. It's wild because like I don't feel like it's where it used to be, where we had like a gigantic doe problem. There's still quite a few, but I don't think it's what it used to be. And so like we spent the last handful of years just trying to knock them back, and I actually personally think that they've been knocked back pretty good. So I think it's getting pretty close to a good ratio where we would want it, and then hopefully we'll see the results that we're hoping for, but we'll see.
How many of you guys tried to, if you're comfortable telling us, like off of what amount of acreage, how many does are you guys shooting?
So on that farm there where he's at, it's between what we lease and own, it's right around, I would say, 1,400 acres. And there were the first few years we killed like 10 to 12 a year. So I would say like over the last 7 years, we've killed probably like right around 50 is my guess. I'd have to look at the book. I don't have the book by me. He has it, but yeah, I don't know. I would say like out of all the deer that I was seeing in each sit that I had last week, there'd probably be 40 to 50 deer that you'd see in a sit in an evening. And I felt like the ratio was probably even some evenings. And then other nights I might see, where you might see 2 does to every buck, but
yeah.
Interesting.
We have some helpers though. We have some guys that come down here and rifle hunt next to our property that lease it, and they primarily just whack the does the whole week. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I assume with you, the way that you guys think, which is somewhat how Jared and I think, is you probably have a little bit of a sponge effect here in the late season, in that if you've got some really good food sources, you're pulling in a lot of deer to that property.
Yeah,
we do.
Cool. Because Rex, I mean, you killed your buck right before Christmas this year.
When was it, Shawn?
Yeah, it was right before Christmas.
Yeah. Yep.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yep. So if you want to know what else I'm doing after the end of the season, it's get in my boat and do more fishing. I've already been fishing, but I'm going to do a lot more.
What's the state requirement for size of catfish?
On the lake,
you better know this by now.
On the lake I fish, there's a slot limit, Truman Lake, and it's
if you're fishing Truman,
26 to 34, you have to throw back, and then you can keep 2 over that, but I don't keep any overs at all.
If you're fishing Truman, I'd just be popping crappie all day.
I do some of that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which I'll be doing more of that, but I've started fishing out Kansas more too for crappie.
There you go.
So,
cool.
Yep.
Very cool, guys. Well, listen, we appreciate you guys coming on the podcast. It's cool to kind of hear the dynamic. Jared and I always talk about our kind of father-son dynamics with our dads. And
well, it makes me feel good that I think your guys' dynamic is very similar to mine and my dad's, and yours and your dad's as well.
Yeah. So you guys feel good you have normal dads now, right?
That's right.
We reaffirmed it at this point.
Yeah. At least I'm not the only one who's been frustrated in the past.
Well, it's normal, trust me.
Well, like I said, we appreciate you guys coming on. It really is cool to not only watch your dynamic, but also to really see that you guys do share the same passion and really even about the show. And kind of, it's funny, Rex, you say that, like when you saw it, you're like, yeah, this isn't like what the hunting shows are like, boys. This is different. But how that has been adopted by the community and really, it's become one of the premier shows in the industry, I think, because it's different. And I think that's a really cool thing for you guys. So obviously really excited to see the next season come out here. And you guys have a ton of digital content coming out too, Shawn. I know that, so, via your YouTube and social. Where else do you guys have digital content dropping?
Oh, man, we're all over, like Roku. We were on Amazon Prime, but we're not anymore. MOTV, pretty much
cool.
Anywhere that is like a digital platform, for the most part, you can find our content, I would say.
Awesome.
We try to put our stuff across the board. So
very cool. Well, hopefully we can rope you guys back in right before next season and your bow's in better shape than it was the last time that we talked, and be able to kind of get all ramped up for the season. But yeah, guys, we appreciate you coming on HUNTR Podcast, and definitely excited to see what Heartland Bowhunter's got here in 22.
Yeah, thank you guys. I truly appreciate you guys having me on. My dad as well.
Yeah. On a closing note, you guys keep this podcast so when your kids are our age or you're our age, you can play it back to them.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll probably be bitching about us by then. So
good call, Rex.
Yeah, it goes full circle. Trust me.
I'll be the one wanting to fish at that point.
Full circle, man. Well, awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day. Good luck pounding a few does out there on the farm, and
we'll stay in touch.
We'll catch up soon.
Okay, guys. Thanks.
All right, guys.
Awesome. Well, really cool, Shawn and his dad Rex to be on there. Obviously, we've talked about it at kind of the inception of HUNTR is like Shawn and Mike and Heartland is somebody that we looked at and said, yes, we like that because it's different. It's it tells a story. And when we were thinking about making content, more show-based content, it was like make HUNTR, like Heartland Bowhunter.
Yeah.
And so again, like those guys have just been phenomenal at that. And even just kind of getting into those discussions there at the end, like here's a guy, Shawn, who's been in this thing for 15 plus years. And like, he's still growing as a hunter and trying to figure out how to make better bows. And he makes misses. That's why we talk about it all the time. Like, listen, you bow hunt long enough, you're not always going to make a perfect shot. But I think it's really cool because you can tell that he and his dad probably don't see eye to eye on everything, but ultimately they're on the same page of like, we love to deer hunt and to manage and to kill big bucks. And that's what we're going to try to do. And we're going to try to do it together. So yeah, really cool to see that. And, also like, again, and it's not,
well, dude, it's cool to see. I mean, it's not cool. I wish this wasn't happening, but like, I guess it makes me feel a little better to see Shawn also struggling with like, public private land access, like with issues with his arrows. It's like, dude, these guys, even somebody at the level of a Heartland Bowhunter, like these are hunters.
They're just guys.
And they're having some of the same issues that we're, navigating ourselves. And
yeah. And I mean, I know we dove down that rabbit hole on the whole public land, private land thing. And it's not to put anybody at odds. It's just, whether it's private land or public land, and it's deer, it's a finite resource. There's only so much of it. We want to have a strong hunting community. It also has to be the bearer of responsibility on every hunter out there to understand that just because it's legal doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And I don't mean that in legality of like baiting versus non-baiting. I mean that in the legality of how many deer can you harvest? What weapons can you use to harvest?
Hunting property lines.
Hunting property lines. Like there's a lot of different things. Yeah, just because I can pull out an app that says, hey, here's where the private and public border is, from a moral standpoint, doesn't, mean that that's the right thing to do. No different than, if somebody says, yeah, like I was friends with these guys, now I'm not, and now I'm hunting this property next to it and I'm going to kill these deer. Yeah, it's legal. Doesn't mean it's morally right. So I think that what I'd love for people to continue to talk about is whether you're hunting private or public, if the state says in like a case like Missouri, you can go and kill 3 bucks during these different seasons, doesn't mean you should. Just because it's not your land, because it's public land, be cognizant of what that property can hold as a resource. And also be respectful to your other hunters who are public land hunters on that place with you. So if you could go out and kill 3 bucks at 3 2-year-olds just because you can, yeah, maybe it would be cool if you didn't. Like, it's a weird thing to do and ask, but because we're having to manage at state levels with the way that the commissions and the wildlife departments are set up, we have a responsibility as a hunter to understand that not everything is the right way to do it. Or just because it's legal doesn't mean that you should. So, and we treat that like that on our private lands. It's just because I can go out and kill a buck, or kill a bunch of does on my property doesn't mean that I'm going to, because I don't want to deplete the resource. That resource doesn't just stay in a high fence on my property. I don't have a high fence. It goes off onto your property. It goes off on the neighbor's property. And so all of you, I thought Rex made a great point there of understanding your neighbors and your co-ops and trying the best of your ability to work with them and communicate with them is going to end up creating a better hunter situation at the end of the day. But yeah, this public-private, battle back and forth is weird. It's a limited resource, and it's deer. Deer is the limiting resource. There are property lines in place for a reason, but don't abuse the resource, whether you respect the guy hunting private land or you don't respect the guy hunting public with you, it doesn't matter. Don't abuse the resource to where you're selfish.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a battle. I mean, as much as there are guys out there, you know, I don't know, trying to shame people for hunting private land or whatever, vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think everybody, like, we want everybody to be able to, like, seek out the form of hunting that they truly want. And if that means hunting public land with a lot of pressure, great. I hope that you can, that's easy. Literally anybody can go out and do that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There are some aspects of, you know, hunting, whether it's private land or just secluded public land, or, I mean, this stuff can be found everywhere. You know, it's that wilderness aspect that I'm talking about, that remoteness.
Yep.
Just the magic that comes with being alone in the woods. At least for me, you know, that's something that, I wish everybody could experience.
The culmination, though, I mean, we all hunt for different reasons. Nobody hunts out there to say, I'm okay. I know we say it in a whim. Nobody really means that, like, I'm okay if I never kill another deer. You hunt because you love to hunt. The ultimate culmination is to harvest a deer, to be successful. And what I want the community to feel is that they have at least a chance of being successful. But where we're heading and where my fear is, because we're continuing to think about recruitment, retention, reactivation, is that we're going to max our limited resource out here. We're going to push it to a point where it's not going to be easy to pull back on. And I understand the fear of the lobbyist in the community of, well, if we don't have hunters, then we're the minority. We're always going to be the minority. Doesn't matter if we have 16 million hunters or we have 20 million hunters. What we can't do, though, is be the force of mass elimination of the limited resource, which is wild game, ducks, deer, turkeys, etc. And we're getting close to that. When people drive up on a piece of public ground and there are a full parking lot full of cars there, that resource is stressed at that point. The private land is part of the glue holding it together. Just like the public leans on the private leans on the public, there's a point of balance there that has to occur in order for that resource to continue to thrive and for all of us to have the privilege to be hunters in this country. We're teetering on that one way or the other. And what I don't want to see is us all turn a blind eye to just say, cool, let me see what the regulations say. All right, I can do that. That's not a responsible hunter.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't think you're saying like whitetails are on the verge of extinction by any means.
No.
You're talking more about the experience or the opportunity to go out, to be secluded in nature, and to hunt a mature whitetail buck.
As bringing a youth in multiple use with my two kids into the sport, there has to be an element of success in order for them to be hooked. No 6-year-old, no 9-year-old wants to sit out all day in the woods 2 weeks in a row and never see a deer. That's not successful, and that's not going to hold them for the future. There is an element of recruitment and retention that is important there. What I'm worried about, though, is that we're not changing the rules and the regulations that were set forth when recruitment and retention were perceived as dying, decreasing. And all of a sudden, these stats come out, and maybe they're bullshit. I don't know. I'm going based off what U.S. Fish and Wildlife is saying, which is the best stats that we have. They're saying, oh, by the way, you guys weren't declining. You were actually increasing. What? Mm-hmm. Well, what about all these liberal measures that we took because we were the declining population? We were the declining participants. Oh, you were actually increasing? Well, how much damage did we do to the populations? How much damage did we do to the hunting success opportunities? And then what does that leave for the next generation? Because that is the important recruitment part. We have enough hunters right now. Per what that guideline says, somebody can argue it, we have enough hunters right now. But if that resource is stressed, there is a cliff that we are walking on every year closer to that eventually we're going to fall off, and then we won't have enough hunters. And the people who need to fill the gaps will say, yeah, I went hunting once. It sucked. There was people everywhere. I never saw a deer. That is where my fearful point is that we're going to come to at some point. And no, it's not next year, and maybe it's not 2 years from now, but we're heading that direction as people like Corey experienced their first public land hunt out of state, and it was like, that was the most miserable thing I've ever experienced in my life. That's not fun. That's not enjoyment. That's not why we hunt. And it's not going to change anytime soon unless we figure out how to adapt the rules and regulations via states to manage it.
Well, here, let me just ask like maybe an ignorant, but just like open-ended question, just like asking honestly, like what benefit do we get out of more hunters?
More money to the states.
What benefit do we get out of that?
More efforts of wildlife management.
We being you and me.
I say we as the citizens of the state.
So they manage the public grounds.
Yep.
Yeah.
See where the miss is there?
Yeah.
And again, my private land in Kentucky borders a large chunk, well, in that case, it's federal ground, but a large chunk of public ground that I benefit because deer can bed on that public ground and they can come to my property, just like they can come off my property and go into public ground. There's a balance that exists there. There's a coexistence of the two pieces of property.
Isn't it?
The property line is imaginative. It's political.
Isn't it weird though? Like you would think, like if somebody just is hearing this for the first time, you would think that public lands would be like the spot. That must be the best hunting because that's where all the money goes for management. When in reality, it's no question the private land has more opportunities.
More carrying capacity, I would say.
Yeah, and arguably more effort put into it from a
more
management
money put
standpoint.
into it. This is where wildlife...
And I'm not saying that like...
No, you're on.
Well, people that, maybe don't own land, it's not like I'm not saying they shouldn't have the right to hunt, but...
No, I think they're getting screwed, honestly.
Yeah.
I think people that hunt public land are getting screwed in today's society because the agencies and the community and everything about hunting right now is pushing towards bringing in more hunters to cram them into a limited resource, which is known as public land. Is it not?
Yeah, no, that sounds right.
And so even if the money is coming in because there's more hunters coming in, you can only manage the property so much. And it doesn't matter how you manage it. If you got too many people on that piece of property, it will kill that property. It will be no good. And those deer will flee to the property bordering it, typically private. And so you can get mad at the private landowners, but frankly, they're creating the sanctuary that's preserving the resource. Mm-hmm. The public land is not a bad thing. We hunt tons of public land. Where I'm fed up with it is that we're putting too many people, we're cramming too many people into a political boundary that means nothing to the wildlife. And the only dollars that are coming in from the state are going to put into resources of public land management. They're not giving me, in most cases, unless I'm doing some sort of assistance program, they're not paying me to make my property better. That's coming out of my pocket to make my property better.
Yeah.
It worked. At one time it worked when people who own private land could give a shit less about planting food plots and cutting timber down and making the habitat better.
Right.
Because the only place that was seeing improvement was public land. In today's society, that's not the case. In fact, most of the money put into management is probably from a private landowner.
Oh, has to be drastically.
We have come to the edge of a very, very steep cliff, which is how many people can you put into public land to maximize dollars over the resource, which is deer and wildlife. Mm-hmm. Based on that number that we just got from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which I have to assume is accurate, we walked past it and we didn't even know it. And that's why when we go to Illinois, again, snapshot, it's a week in one area, packed. People talk about guys like the hunting public going overboard. I don't think it's the guys like the hunting public that have blown this thing out of proportion. It's the states that have continued to say, give us hunters, give us hunters, give us hunters. Yeah. Georgia wasn't even on the list in the top 15 states for license sold in 2004. They're at like number 5 now in the country. It's a massive, I would have to assume they doubled or at least 2.5 times the amount of hunters in that state.
It can't be the fault of people promoting those places. It can't be. Granted, maybe that is the reason for it, but it seems like it should be the responsibility of the state agency to regulate that pressure.
everything comes down to politics.
To say, because it's great that everybody wants here. That's demand. It should be the state's place to say, well, we can only allow for this to preserve the quality of the
and the problem is
there.
we aren't acknowledging that things have changed, and thus this is where we're at. So rant there, but it's because I care about the resource, whether it's on my property. That even if those deer are on my property, they're not my resource. They're the resource of the people. That's the whole point. Unless it's in a high fence, those aren't my deer. That's not my buck. It's the property of the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. If we're sitting here, or the state of Kentucky, or whatever. Ultimately, though, if you're jamming too many people into a limited resource, political bound public land piece, that resource fails to exist, at least on those lands, which is going to then create a tension between the people that hunt that property and me on my own private property. Because they're going to say, well, that guy over there hoards all the deer. No. That's because you got 600 people hunting 1,000 acres. Can't sustain it. Just like if I switch the rules, this property can't sustain having that many people on mine. It's not a hard concept to think of, but nobody can change it except for the state politicians. And I don't think that they're paying attention.
Yeah. Well, and I guess in their defense, like there are some like initiatives, like plots and stuff, like that's at least attempting to get the public access to private lands and is compensating those private landowners, for that access.
But those private landowners don't care about hunting. That's why they're in plots, is they don't care.
Sure.
Take over my property, give access, manage it, do whatever you want, because I don't care about the wildlife. Different than you and I, who we have some cost share programs. We have things like CRP and CREP, but those are all from a federal level.
Yeah.
Why would the state not say, hey, you could be a herd influencer, using Jeff Sturgis. How can we help you make your property better so that you make surrounding properties better? I'm all ears. Instead, it's the requirement of me, the private landowner, to pay to make my property better that will benefit people outside of my political border that doesn't matter to the wildlife. And I'm okay with that because I love it. And I know...
You do it because you love it.
I do it because I love it. But I also know that I'm making a difference on a very, 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 very small level. And that's fine. But I worry for the future of the hunting population, because there is only a limited amount of private land for access, that if they have to hunt public, we're going to walk off a cliff. And the numbers are going to go from, oh, we were at all-time highs. Whoa, where did 5 million hunters go? Well, they weren't successful because they hunted state land that's overhunted.
Yeah.
There will never be, Pennsylvania will never go to a quota farm on their game lands. They won't do it.
People just stop hunting.
People just stop hunting.
Yeah.
And we're close. We're teetering. We're going to go from an all-time high to an all-time low real fast. Blink of an eye. And if you take by what state agencies are telling you of like, well, let's not jump to conclusions. Let's see what happens in the next 3 years and then we'll average it. 3 years from now, it's too late. It's too late. It's already come past.
I mean, so back to the original question. Again, maybe an ignorant one, but an open-ended one. So what happens at that point? So if all those hunters fall off the cliff, they don't exist anymore. How does that affect those
state
of us
agencies lose funding.
Okay.
Less funding, less people, less ability to do things that are at the state landscape level. I don't want to see it come to privatization of wildlife. There's a reason that we set up the North American wildlife model in this country and that it works. The more that those states agencies suffer, the closer it gets to privatization of wildlife. And
what do you mean
not
by
a good
that?
thing.
So what does that look like? What is the privatization of wildlife?
Essentially, the privatization of wildlife is the state doesn't manage the resource. The individuals manage the resource on a private level, meaning the deer on my farm right now are my deer. They're not. They shouldn't be because you can't influence
Yeah, but
them all.
what literally is different? Because it is essentially that way. Like, even though, right?
You don't set your bag limits.
The state wouldn't set bag limits at that point. I see.
That's privatization of wildlife. You kill what you can kill. People can hunt. Who hunts? Who's allowed to hunt? It gets real real tight. And it's not a good. Europe does it. That's where it is. It's in Europe. That's why the land barons are basically the ones who control the land. The only way you could go hunt there is if you're invited or a family descendant of a land baron. It's not how we created it. And then it affects the thing that we've been talking about for a long time, which is less hunters, less PR funds, industry suffers.
Yeah. That part of it I can deal with, I think.
I think you say that.
And I say that because I know.
Till you see it.
I know.
And it's just a trickle effect, and it's one of those things that I've been saying it since COVID. I remember when people were talking about, hey, we're selling more hunting license in this and during COVID and more fishing license in COVID. It's a false high.
Sure.
Like, you don't think we're actually going to sustain these. And now I'm switching my tone to the point, you don't actually think we can sustain these numbers.
Right.
Because I don't think we can.
I don't think so either.
So it's getting to the point, I'm not worried about today's generation of 25 to 55-year-old hunters. I am very concerned about the 6-year-olds to 18-year-olds who are going to walk into a hunting realm, unless they have access to private land, unless they have family that owns private land. They're going to walk into a realm of public that they're quickly going to realize hunting sucks. Mm-hmm. It's boring. I don't see anything. I mean, hell, my kids experience that even on private land. How do I hold them? How do I get them to feel like you and I feel, and a lot of these listeners feel about hunting? It will be a very, very, very hard battle. And when that generation falters, now you start talking about being the minority of this country and that hunting's at risk. Today, hunting isn't at risk. Nobody's threatening hunting. We're stronger than ever. 6 years from now, 10 years from now, when we fall off this cliff because all of the people that are hunting public land realize, like,
it sucks.
Yeah. Now we're in trouble. And to Rex's point, it will ebb and flow, right? When all those people fall off, guess what becomes better? Public land.
Yeah.
Public land becomes better.
As long as we have it.
As long as
I think that's what you're worried about.
I am.
Yeah.
So, and again, I say that, maybe I'm wrong, but nobody's talking about it. That's why we started this thing. Nobody's talking about these things.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's touchy. People get agitated when you start talking about private versus and I mean, dude, hunting is just it's an emotional sport. It's ego driven. We want to kill the biggest buck out there in the woods, and so like when you start questioning how we do it, or where we're doing it, or anything like that, people just fluff up their chest, or
agree.
They just want to.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a touchy subject, and it's something I'm sure we'll revisit. I know we're trying to work on a couple state deer biologists, like heads of the state, and so that'll be questions to ask them. But I also know, and it's no knock to them, it's not even their fault. A lot of these states will decline our invite because they're not allowed to talk to people like us for these reasons.
Well, we should start with PA. We should get PA Game Commission back in here.
I've tried.
Oh, really?
Multiple times.
Interesting.
Isn't it?
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's keep trying.
Yep, I will.
Good.
I will.
Fine.
And if anybody thinks I'm wrong, tell us. Like, that's the whole point. I hope I'm wrong. Let me put it this way. I hope I am wrong about all of these assumptions. I'm just trying to talk proactively here that there are more hunters today than 2004. There is a limited resource in the amount of deer. There's a limited resource in the amount of public land. And if you start cramming too many people in these places, the success rate's going to fall. And whether you hunt to kill a deer or you just hunt because you love it, eventually people will quit hunting. And at that point, we're in a bad spot.
Yeah. And I mean, dude, wouldn't you? If I hunted for 5, 6, 7 years and I was just struggling, running into guys, not seeing a big deer, like, that's not hunting.
Struggle with my own kids of just seeing deer, period. We go out and hunt 6 days in a row and we don't see a deer, period, or nothing even close to being in range. It's a struggle for a young kid. And that is the generation I'm worried about for recruitment. I I'm not worried about the 27-year-old who's trying to think about hunting for the first time. They're old enough to say, hey, do you want to hunt or you do not? I don't need to convince you. You either do or you don't. The 6 to 9-year-old definitely needs convincing, and they also need support, and they need encouragement, and that usually comes in form of success. Without that, you're going to have a tough time holding them through to the time they're 27.
Yeah, no doubt.
Just the way it is. So anyways, we appreciate Shawn and Rex Luchtel for being on the HUNTR Podcast. Always great to have those guys. Needs no reminder, but anything you want to check out from Heartland Bowhunter, website, YouTube, MOTV, Outdoor Sportsman Group. They're kind of everywhere and anywhere, like Shawn said, but we'll definitely tune back into those guys here before the beginning of the next season. And for us, we're going to be checking out and got more content coming from some great guests here in 22. So I hope you stick with us.
Later.
Take me on down the